The doctor's voice cut across the emergency room like a blade through silence. Another homeless admission. Pneumonia. Probably won't make it through the night. Don't waste a private room on this one. Dr. Raymond Kessler didn't bother lowering his voice as he gestured toward the gurney being wheeled past the nurse's station. The elderly man lying there, thin as winter branches and just as brittle, didn't seem to hear. Or perhaps he'd simply stopped listening to voices like that years ago. What Dr. Kessler didn't know, what nobody in that fluorescent-lit chaos knew, was that in exactly 8 hours, 12 soldiers would walk through those doors in full dress uniform, and nothing in that hospital would ever be quite the same again. The gurney's wheels squeaked against linoleum worn smooth by decades of emergencies. Overhead, fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting everyone in the sickly pallor of institutional efficiency. Around the nurse's station, staff moved with the practice choreography of people who'd seen it all before. Stab wounds, heart attacks, overdoses, and yes, homeless patients with pneumonia who'd probably be back next month if they survived this visit. The man on the gurney looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts and bad decisions. His face was gaunt, cheekbones pressing against skin weathered to the texture of old leather. His hair, steel gray and unwashed, stuck to his forehead in damp streaks. The hospital gown hung loose on a frame that suggested he hadn't eaten properly in months, maybe years. His hands, resting on his chest, were scarred and calloused, the knuckles swollen with what might have been old breaks that had healed without proper medical attention. But there was something else. Something in the way those hands lay absolutely still, fingers aligned with military precision. Something in the way his breathing, shallow and labored though it was, maintained an oddly steady rhythm. And there, just visible above the collar of the hospital gown, hung a set of dog tags on a chain that had worn a permanent groove into the skin of his neck. Nurse Sarah Chun caught the detail as she moved to take his vitals. She'd been working night shift in this ER for 7 years, and she'd learned to see what others missed. The way he'd instinctively straightened slightly when a doctor had spoken, even in his weakened state. The precise arrangement of the few personal items in the plastic bag beside the gurney. A worn photograph, face down. A jacket that looked like it had been held together with duct tape and determination. And those dog tags. Sir, she said softly, touching his shoulder with a gentleness that seemed foreign in this environment. Can you tell me your name? His eyes opened slowly. They were gray, the color of smoke or winter sky, and despite the fever clouding them, there was something sharp underneath. Something that suggested those eyes had once seen things most people couldn't imagine. Leonard, he whispered. His voice was rough, scraped raw by coughing and disuse. Leonard Whitaker. She wrote it down, noting the way he'd given both names without being asked. Military habit. Maybe, Mr. Whitaker, I'm going to get you settled and star in 4. You're pretty dehydrated. He nodded once. A small movement, economical. Yes, ma'am. The ma'am hit her somewhere unexpected. Nobody called her ma'am anymore. Certainly not the homeless patients who usually came through angry or defensive or too far gone to care about courtesy. Dr. Kessler appeared at the bedside, tablet in hand, already moving on to the next case in his mind. Severe pneumonia, he announced to no one in particular. Malnutrition, probable exposure. He tapped at his screen without looking at the man in the bed. When did you last eat? Leonard's eyes tracked to the doctor's face. Yesterday morning, sir. Shelter breakfast. Kessler made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been dismissal. And before that, a pause. Then, quietly, can't recall exactly, sir. Right? Kessler's tone carried the weight of someone who'd made up his mind long before asking the question. We'll start antibiotics, get some fluids in you. He finally looked at Leonard, and his expression suggested he was already calculating the cost-benefit analysis of the bed space. You have any family we should contact? Leonard's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward the pocket of his jacket in the plastic bag. No, sir. Emergency contact. Someone who should know you're here? No, sir. Kessler nodded as if this confirmed everything he'd assumed. He turned to Sarah. Move him to a shared room when one opens up. No point tying up resources we might actually need tonight. He walked away before Sarah could respond, his white coat disappearing into the flow of staff and patients that never stopped moving through the ER. She looked down at Leonard and found him staring at the ceiling tiles, his jaw set in a way that suggested he'd heard every word and expected nothing different. If you're watching this from anywhere in the world, we'd love to know where you're joining us from. Drop a comment below with your city or country. Stories like this one happen everywhere, and you might have a quiet hero in your own community whose humble appearance hides an extraordinary past. Now, let's continue. Sarah adjusted his oxygen cannula, checking the flow. The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily, displaying numbers that told her what she already knew. He was sick, very sick, but he'd been sick before, probably, and somehow he'd kept going. As she worked, she noticed more details. The way his body bore scars like a map of violence. A long surgical scar across his abdomen, partially hidden by the gown. Smaller marks on his arms that looked like shrapnel burns. On his left shoulder, just visible when the gown shifted, the faded blue-gray of an old tattoo. She couldn't make out the design, but it looked military. Everything about him looked military, actually, once you knew to look for it. The ER continued its controlled chaos around them. A drunk teenager vomiting into a basin. A mother holding a feverish child. An elderly woman who'd fallen and couldn't remember how. The usual Friday night symphony of human fragility and bad luck. But Sarah found herself lingering at Leonard's bedside longer than necessary. Something about him didn't fit the pattern. Most of the homeless patients who came through were either aggressive or completely withdrawn, walls built so high that nothing could reach them. This man was neither. He was polite, respectful, and underneath the illness and the grime and the obvious years of living rough, there was a kind of quiet dignity that felt earned rather than affected. She reached for the plastic bag containing his belongings, checking for any medications he might have been taking. The jacket was worn soft, the fabric so thin in places she could see through it. The photograph was standard size, the kind you'd keep in a wallet, though he didn't seem to have one. She turned it over carefully. 2 girls, teenagers, maybe 13 or 14. Identical twins with bright smiles and matching soccer uniforms. The photo was old, the colors slightly faded, the edges soft from handling. On the back, in careful handwriting, Jessica and Amanda, 7th grade championship. Love you forever, Dad. Sarah's throat tightened. She looked from a photo to the man in the bed. His eyes were closed now, his breathing shallow and rapid. She slipped the photo back into the bag and positioned it where he could reach it if he wanted. The dog tags caught the light as she moved. She'd seen plenty of dog tags in this ER, mostly on young soldiers from the nearby base. But these were different, older. The metal was worn smooth in places, the engraving shallow from decades of wear. There was something else on the chain, too. Another set of tags, she realized. Smaller, with different information. Before she could look closer, an alarm sounded from across the ER. Trauma incoming, someone shouted. Sarah squeezed Leonard's hand once, gently, and moved toward the chaos. Hours passed. The ER cleared slightly as patients were either admitted, treated, and released, or transferred. Leonard was moved to a shared room on the 2nd floor, a space with 4 beds separated by thin curtains that did nothing to block sound or provide real privacy. His roommates were a man recovering from a hernia surgery, a teenager with a broken leg, and an elderly woman who called out for her daughter every few minutes. The night nurse who took over from Sarah barely glanced at his chart. She checked his vitals, adjusted his 4, and left without speaking to him. The doctor who came by at midnight, not Kessler, but someone equally hurried, listened to his lungs, prescribed a stronger antibiotic, and moved on. Leonard lay in the narrow bed and stared at the water-stained ceiling tiles. His chest felt like it was being crushed from the inside. Every breath required a conscious decision to keep breathing. The fever made the edges of the room shimmer and blur. His hand found the dog tags by instinct. His fingers traced the familiar letters and numbers. He didn't need to see them to know what they said. He'd memorized every detail 35 years ago. In a plastic bag on the bedside table, the photograph of his daughters waited. Jessica and Amanda. They'd be 30 now. He knew their faces had changed, knew they'd grown into women he might not recognize on the street. But in his mind, they were still 13, still smiling in those soccer uniforms, still looking at their father like he was someone worth looking up to. That was before Afghanistan, before the phone call about their mother, before the memorial service he couldn't attend because he was pinned down in a valley that wasn't supposed to exist, fighting an enemy that wasn't supposed to be there. Before he came home to an empty house and a note from his daughters asking why he hadn't been there when Mom died. Before he'd left his own note and walked away from the only thing he'd ever loved more than his country. The fever spiked. Leonard's vision blurred further. Somewhere in the distance, a monitor was beeping too fast. Or maybe that was his heart. He couldn't tell anymore. His lips moved, forming words that came out as barely audible whispers. 9.5 degrees north, he breathed. 79.5 west. December 20th, 1989. The coordinates fell from his mouth like a prayer or a confession. Panama City. Operation Just Cause. The mission that had earned him a silver star and cost him his best friend. Miguel, he whispered to the water-stained tiles. Miguel, brother. Still here. Still trying. The room tilted. The ceiling tiles multiplied and swam. Somewhere far away, someone was calling for a doctor. But Leonard was already somewhere else, in a different hospital, in a different country, holding pressure on a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding no matter how hard he pressed. Not your fault, Leo, Miguel had said with his last breath. Never your fault. But it always had been. Just like missing his wife's death had been his fault. Just like abandoning his daughters had been his fault. Some things you couldn't fix with training or courage or all the medals in the world. The darkness came up like water, and Leonard let it take him, still whispering coordinates to ghosts who couldn't answer back. The morning had started the way most mornings started for Leonard Whitaker. Cold, stiff, alive when part of him still wondered why he deserved to be. He'd woken under the Madison Street Bridge at 5:43, exactly 17 minutes before sunrise. His internal clock hadn't needed an alarm in 40 years. The Army had beaten punctuality into his bones, and 3 decades later, his body still responded to rhythms set in a different lifetime. The cardboard he'd slept on had absorbed moisture from the concrete during the night. His back ached in the familiar places. The old shrapnel wounds in his left shoulder. The surgical scar across his abdomen, where they'd removed part of his intestine after Kandahar. The knee that had never quite healed right after he'd jumped from a helicopter in weather that had grounded every sensible pilot. He'd sat up slowly, folding the blanket with the same precision he'd once used to fold his dress uniform. The blanket was olive green, military issue from some surplus store, worn thin but still functional. It was the only thing between him and hypothermia most nights. He folded it into a perfect rectangle and placed it in his rucksack. The rucksack was older than some of the soldiers currently serving. It had been with him through 3 wars and 6 years on the streets. The other men under the bridge were still sleeping. Carlos, who'd lost his apartment when his disability checks stopped coming. Jerome, who talked to people nobody else could see. Tommy, who was 19 and shouldn't have been there at all, but had nowhere else to go after his family kicked him out. Leonard had given Tommy his second blanket 3 nights ago. The kid needed it more. Leonard had survived worse cold in worse places. He'd pulled on his boots, the ones held together with duct tape and determination, and begun his morning routine. First, the walk to the gas station bathroom 4 blocks away. The attendant there, a tired woman named Rosa, never hassled him as long as he didn't make a mess. He'd washed his face and hands with the industrial soap that smelled like chemicals and broken promises. The mirror had shown him a stranger's face. Gaunt, gray, old in a way that had nothing to do with years. But his hands, when he'd washed them, had moved with the same efficient economy they'd always had. Scrub, rinse, dry, no motion, no wasted anything. From the gas station, he'd walked to the cemetery. 3 miles through neighborhoods, slowly waking up. Past houses where families were having breakfast. Past schools where children were being dropped off. past all the ordinary miracle of ordinary lives that he'd once had and lost. The cemetery opened at 6. The groundskeeper, an older black man named Raymond, had stopped asking questions 2 years ago. Now, he just nodded when Leonard arrived, sometimes left a coffee on the bench by the maintenance shed. Today there'd been coffee. Leonard had drunk it slowly, savoring the warmth, before walking to the grave. Elizabeth and Whitaker, beloved wife and mother. The stone was simple, gray granite. He'd picked it out from a catalog in an office that smelled like funeral flowers and other people's grief. That had been 6 years ago, right before he'd written the note to his daughters and disappeared. He'd sat on the grass beside her grave, his back against the headstone, and talked to her the way he'd been talking to her every morning since. "Good morning, Beth. The girls are doing well. I checked their social media yesterday at the library. Jessica's working at County General now. Pediatrics, just like she always wanted. Amanda's doing her residency at Stanford. You'd be so proud. They're so beautiful, Beth. They look just like you." His voice had been quiet. Nobody else visited this section of the cemetery at 6 in the morning. It was just him and Beth, and the truth he could only tell the dead. "I miss you. God, I miss you so much. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry for everything." He'd stayed for an hour, watching the sun rise over the headstones, feeling the dew soak through his pants. When he'd finally stood, his joints had protested. Everything hurt these days. The cold, the hunger, the weight of 6 years carrying guilt like a rucksack full of stones. From his cemetery, he'd walked to the public library. It opened at 9. He'd waited on the steps with the others who had nowhere else to be. The regulars knew him. The quiet one who never caused trouble, who always thanked the librarians, who could sit in the same chair for 6 hours without moving except to turn pages. He'd logged onto one of the public computers and opened social media. It was a ritual that hurt more than it helped, but he couldn't stop. Jessica had posted a photo from her shift. She was smiling, holding a newborn baby, her scrubs printed with cartoon dinosaurs. The caption read, "Day 247 of living the dream. Exhausted but grateful." Amanda had shared an article about new treatments for pediatric cancer. Always the researcher, just like her mother. The photo on her profile showed her at a conference, presenting to a room full of doctors. She looked confident, strong, nothing like the 13-year-old who'd asked why Daddy didn't love them anymore. Leonard had stared at their faces until the screen blurred. Then he'd logged off, cleared the browser history out of habit, and walked away from the only window into their lives he still had. The cough had started around noon. He'd been at the park, the one where the church group brought sandwiches on Wednesdays. The first cough had felt like something tearing loose inside his chest. The second had brought up blood. He'd sat on the bench and waited for it to pass. It didn't pass. It got worse. By 2 o'clock, he couldn't catch his breath. By 3, he was on the ground, and someone was calling an ambulance. He tried to refuse, tried to stand up and walk away. But his legs wouldn't work right, and the darkness was closing in from the edges, and the last thing he'd remember before the paramedics arrived was thinking that maybe Beth would be waiting on the other side, and maybe she wouldn't be as angry as his daughters were. Now, lying in a hospital bed with machines beeping and antibiotics dripping into his veins, Leonard understood that he'd been dying for a long time. The pneumonia was just the thing that had finally caught up with him, like Miguel catching up to him in dreams, like Beth's voice in the quiet moments, like the memories of his daughters at 13, frozen in time, never aging past the day he'd walked away. The fever pulled him under again. In the dreams that followed, he was back in Panama. December 20th, 1989, the night that had made him a legend and broken him in ways no one could see. The helicopter had dropped them 2 clicks from the target. Modelo Prison. 43 American hostages being held by Manuel Noriega's forces. Their team had 12 hours to get in, extract the hostages, and get out before the entire Panamanian Defense Forces came down on them. Miguel had been point. Miguel Santos from East Los Angeles, who could move through jungle like smoke and quote poetry in 3 languages. Miguel, who'd saved Leonard's life in Grenada and stood up as best man at his wedding and held both his baby daughters when they were born. The mission had gone bad 6 minutes in. Ambush. RPGs, and automatic weapons fire from positions they hadn't known existed. Miguel had taken the first hit. The second had been meant for Leonard. Leonard had held him while he died. 90 seconds from first hit to last breath. He'd pressed his hands against the wound, but the blood had kept coming. Miguel's last words had been absolving him of guilt that Leonard would carry anyway. Not your fault, Leo. Never your fault. Tell my sister. Tell her I love her. Leonard had held the position for 6 hours after that. Alone, bleeding from his own wounds, calling in fire support and coordinates while Miguel's body grew cold beside him. They'd extracted all 43 hostages. They'd given Leonard a silver star and promoted him to captain. They'd never asked what it cost him to hold that position for 6 hours next to his best friend's corpse. The dream shifted. Now he was at the funeral. Miguel's funeral, back in Los Angeles. His sister Maria had hugged Leonard and told him it wasn't his fault. Everyone had told him it wasn't his fault. Even Miguel had told him it wasn't his fault. But Leonard had been the one to clear that building. Leonard had been the one to miss the second team waiting in ambush. Leonard had been the one who'd lived when Miguel died. He woke gasping. The hospital room solidified around him. Beeping monitors. Antiseptic smell. Someone crying softly in the bed across the room. His hands were shaking. They'd been shaking for 35 years. Some days worse than others. He touched the dog tags around his neck. His own, and underneath Miguel's. He'd been wearing both sets since December 20th, 1989. 2 names, 2 serial numbers, 1 promise he'd never broken. Still here, brother, he whispered to the empty room. Still trying. His fingers found a plastic bag on the bedside table. Found a photograph of his daughters. Traced their faces through the plastic. Tomorrow was Jessica's birthday. She'd be 30. He wondered if anyone would take her out for dinner. If Amanda would fly in from California. If they ever talked about him anymore, or if they'd finally let him go. The fever spiked again. The room wavered. Somewhere far away, an alarm was sounding. Leonard closed his eyes and let the darkness come. In the darkness, Miguel was waiting. And Beth. And the man he used to be before the guilt and the grief had worn him down to nothing. I'm sorry, he whispered. To all of them. To everyone he'd failed. I'm so sorry. Dr. Raymond Kessler made his rounds at 7:30 in the morning with the efficiency of a man who had better places to be. His residents trailed behind him like ducklings, tablets in hand, ready to absorb whatever wisdom he deigned to share between dismissive glances at patient charts. The second-floor ward was his least favorite part of the day. Too many beds filled with people who'd be back next month with the same problems. Chronic conditions, poor life choices, the healthcare system's revolving door, spinning endlessly while insurance companies complained and administrators demanded efficiency metrics. He stopped at the first bed in the shared room. The hernia patient, recovering well, would be discharged by noon. The teenager with the broken leg, good family, good insurance, healing on schedule. The elderly woman calling for her daughter, dementia, probably heading to long-term care. And then there was bed 4, Leonard Whitaker, the homeless admission from last night. Kessler pulled up the chart on his tablet, scanning the overnight notes. Fever spiked to 103 at 2 a.m. Responded to acetaminophen. Antibiotics continuing. Vital stable, but poor nutritional status. High risk for complications. He approached the bed where Leonard lay with eyes closed, oxygen cannula in place for dripping steadily. The morning light coming through the window made him look even more gaunt, if that was possible. His breathing was shallow, but regular. Mr. Whitaker, Kessler said, his voice loud enough to carry to the residents clustered behind him. Classic presentation of severe community-acquired pneumonia complicated by malnutrition and probable immunocompromise from chronic homelessness. He said it the way someone might describe a textbook case, clinically detached, as if the man in the bed couldn't hear every word. As if hearing yourself reduced to a diagnosis didn't carry its own kind of violence. Leonard's eyes opened, those gray eyes that had seen things Dr. Kessler couldn't imagine. But Kessler wasn't looking at his eyes. He was looking at his chart, at the numbers that told him everything he thought he needed to know. How are you feeling today? Kessler asked, still not making eye contact. Better, sir. Leonard's voice was rough but clear. Thank you for asking. The surmaid, one of the residents, glanced up from her tablet. Dr. Kessler didn't notice. You'll need to stay at least another 48 hours. Kessler tapped at his screen. We'll need to see improvement in your chest X-ray before discharge. And you'll need to arrange somewhere to go. He looked up then, briefly. I assume you're not returning to the streets in this condition. Leonard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. No, sir. I'll find somewhere. There are shelters that take medical cases. Social services can help with that. Kessler was already moving toward the next bed, the conversation clearly over in his mind. Make sure someone from social work sees him before discharge, he told the residents. We can't have him walking out of here and ending up back in the ER next week. He said it loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. The hernia patient looked uncomfortable. The teenager's mother, sitting beside his bed, frowned. Leonard said nothing, just turned his head slightly toward the window, his hands resting on his chest with that same precise alignment. Across the room, near the doorway, a figure in maintenance coveralls stood with a mop bucket. Eduardo Martinez had been cleaning floors at County General for 3 years, but before that, he'd cleaned floors at Forward Operating Base Salerno in Afghanistan. Before that, he'd been a ranger, 75th Regiment, 3rd Battalion. 8 years of jumping out of perfectly good aircraft and doing things his family back home would never fully understand. He'd been about to mop his way into the next room when Dr. Kessler's voice had stopped him. Not the words themselves, but the tone, the casual dismissal, the way you talk about someone when you've already decided they don't matter. Eduardo had heard that tone before, from officers who looked at enlisted men like equipment, from civilians who looked at soldiers like children playing dress-up, from people who'd never had to hold a position while mortars fell and friends died, and the only thing keeping you alive was training and luck and the brother beside you. He watched Dr. Kessler leave, trailing residents behind him like a comet trailing debris. Then he looked at the man in bed 4. Really looked. The precise way his hands were positioned. The automatic straightening of posture when addressed. The sir that came out reflexive, muscle memory from decades of service. And there, visible above the collar of the hospital gown, the dog tags. Eduardo moved into the room, pushing the mop bucket ahead of him. He worked his way around the other beds, giving himself time to observe. The man's breathing was labored but controlled. His eyes tracked movement with awareness that didn't match the weakness of his body. When a nurse entered to check vitals, he thanked her with the same quiet courtesy. Eduardo finished mopping near the hernia patient's bed and moved closer to bed 4. As he worked, he studied the man more carefully. The scars visible on his arms weren't the random marks of street violence. They were organized, surgical, and those looked like shrapnel burns on his left forearm, the kind you got from being too close to an explosion. The man's eyes were closed again, but Eduardo didn't think he was sleeping. There was a tension in his shoulders, a readiness that suggested he was tracking everyone in the room without looking. Eduardo pushed the bucket closer, angling so he could see the dog tags more clearly. Standard military issue. Old from the wear on the metal. But there was something else on the chain. Another set of tags, smaller, hanging beside the first set. That stopped Eduardo cold. He'd seen that before, carrying a fallen brother's tags. The weight you bore when someone died under your command or beside you, or because you've been too slow or too late or just unlucky. He continued mopping, but his mind was working through possibilities. Special forces, maybe. The age was right for Panama or Desert Storm. The scars suggested someone who'd seen serious combat. The way he carried himself, even weakened by illness, suggested someone who'd held authority. A nurse Eduardo knew slightly, Sarah Chun from the night shift who'd stayed late to finish paperwork, came into the room. She moved to Leonard's bedside, checking the foresight, adjusting the oxygen flow. Her touch was gentle, professional, with none of Kessler's clinical detachment. "How are you doing, Mr. Whitaker?" she asked quietly. "Still here, ma'am." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Still trying." Something about the phrase made Eduardo's hands tighten on the mop handle. "Still here. Still trying." The words you said when you were the one who survived. When you woke up every day wondering why you got to wake up when better men didn't. Sarah noticed Eduardo and gave him a small nod. He returned it, then made his way toward the door. But he paused at the threshold, looking back at bed for one more time. The photograph was visible in the plastic bag on the bedside table. Two girls in soccer uniforms. The worn green jacket with what might have been patches removed, leaving only ghost outlines. The rucksack on the floor beside the bed, packed with the same precision soldiers used in the field. Eduardo pulled out his phone as he moved into the hallway. He had a friend who'd know what to do. A retired first sergeant who ran a veteran outreach program, who'd helped Eduardo transition from Ranger Battalion to civilian life, who understood that some men couldn't ask for help but might accept it if offered right. He found a quiet corner near the elevators and made the call. It went a voicemail. "Hey, First Sergeant, it's Martinez. I'm at County General. There's a guy here, older veteran, getting treated like trash by the staff. Something about him feels wrong. Not wrong bad. Wrong like he's more than he appears. He's got the bearing. Got scars that tell stories. Carrying what looks like a brother's tags. And he's alone. No family, no contacts, nothing. Figured you might want to know. Room 212, bed 4. Name's Leonard Whitaker." He hung up and stood there for a moment, looking back down the hallway toward room 212. Through the doorway, he could see the foot of bed 4, see the shape of the man lying there, outlined against the window light. Something wasn't right. Or maybe something was exactly right, and everyone else was just too busy or too blind to see it. Eduardo went back to his rounds, but throughout the morning, he found reasons to pass by room 212. Each time, he saw the same thing. Leonard lying still, hands precisely positioned, breathing controlled despite the obvious effort. Sometimes his lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. Sometimes his fingers touched the dog tags around his neck, tracing the letters there. Around 10 a.m., Dr. Kessler came back through with a different group of residents. Medical students this time, young and eager, hanging on his every word. "This patient," Kessler said, gesturing toward Leonard without looking at him, "represents the challenges we face in treating homeless populations. Noncompliance, poor follow-through, high probability of readmission. The best we can do is stabilize them and connect them with resources, but ultimately, these are lifestyle choices with medical consequences." One of the medical students, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, looked from Kessler to Leonard and back again. Her expression suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with what she was hearing. Leonard's eyes were open now. He looked directly at Dr. Kessler with those gray eyes, and for just a moment, something shifted in his expression. Not anger, not even hurt, just a kind of weary recognition, like he'd heard it all before and knew he'd hear it all again. "With respect, sir," he said quietly, "I understand your concerns about resources and readmission rates. I'll make sure I'm not a burden to your department longer than necessary." The formality of it, the precision of the language, the absolute courtesy in the face of casual contempt, it made the medical student's eyes widen slightly. Made her look at Leonard differently, really see him for the first time. But Kessler just nodded, as if Leonard had confirmed everything he'd suspected, and moved on to discuss the next patient. Eduardo, watching from the hallway, felt something harden in his chest. He'd seen this before, too. People looked at the uniform and saw respect. Looked past the uniform and saw nothing. As if service had an expiration date. As if the man you'd been stopped matching the moment you stopped being useful. He checked his phone. No callback yet from the first sergeant. He sent a text. "This one's important. Trust me." Then he went back to mopping floors, but his mind was working. Making plans. Because some things you couldn't walk past. Some men you couldn't leave behind, even if they'd left themselves behind years ago. In bed 4, Leonard closed his eyes and whispered coordinates to ghosts. 9.5 degrees north, 79.5 west. December 20th, 1989. Miguel's coordinates. Miguel's date. Miguel's death that Leonard carried like those extra dog tags around his neck. "Still here, brother," he breathed. Still trying. And somewhere in the city, a phone was ringing. The fever came back with a vengeance around noon. Leonard felt it building like a storm system moving across his body, starting in his chest and radiating outward until his skin felt like it was burning from the inside. The nurse came and went. More acetaminophen. More fluids. The same concerned look that didn't quite translate into anything beyond clinical intervention. His temperature read 100.2 on the digital thermometer. High enough to worry about. Not high enough to panic yet, but high enough to bring the memories back in vivid, unavoidable detail. He tried to fight it at first. Tried to keep his mind anchored to the hospital room, to the beeping monitors, an antiseptic smell, and the sound of the elderly woman across the room, calling for her daughter. But the fever didn't care what he tried. It pulled him under like a riptide, and suddenly he wasn't in County General anymore. He was in Panama. December 20th, 1989. 2300 hours. The air thick with humidity and smoke and the copper smell of blood. The helicopter had dropped them in the jungle 2 kilometers from Modelo Prison. Captain Leonard Whitaker, age 32, leading a 12-man Special Forces team on a mission that officially didn't exist. Extract 43 American hostages before Noriega's forces executed them. Get in, get out, leave no trace. Miguel had been walking point. Miguel Santos, who moved through jungle like he'd been born there, who could spot an ambush position from 50 meters out, who'd saved Leonard's life in Grenada and never let him forget it. Miguel, who had a sister back in Los Angeles who sent him care packages with homemade tamales and letters about her nursing school classes. They'd made it 6 minutes before everything went wrong. The ambush had come from 3 sides simultaneously. RPGs lighting up the night like deadly fireworks. Automatic weapons fire so thick the air seemed solid with it. Positions they hadn't known existed. Defenses that weren't supposed to be there. Miguel had been scanning the second-story windows of a partially collapsed building when the RPG hit. Leonard had seen it coming, had opened his mouth to shout a warning, but the explosion arrived before the words could form. The blast had thrown Miguel backward. Leonard had gone to him immediately, leaving his position, breaking every tactical rule in the book. But tactical rules didn't matter when your best friend was lying in the dirt with his chest torn open. In the hospital bed, Leonard's hands moved unconsciously to press against an invisible wound. His breathing quickened. The monitors registered his rising heart rate with increasingly urgent beeps. He'd held pressure on Miguel's chest while calling in their position, while directing fire, while coordinating with the backup team. Miguel's blood had been hot against his hands, pulsing out in rhythm with his failing heartbeat. "Talk to me, Leo," Miguel had said, his voice wet, bubbling. "Tell me about the girls." So Leonard had talked, had told Miguel about his twin daughters, 7 years old then, who'd learned to ride bikes that summer, who'd started 2nd grade and were already reading above their level, who asked every night when Daddy was coming home. "They're beautiful, Leo," Miguel had whispered, "just like Beth. You're a lucky man." The second RPG had come while Leonard was talking. It should have hit him, would have hit him if Miguel hadn't seen it coming despite the pain, despite the blood loss, despite everything. Miguel had used the last of his strength to shove Leonard sideways. The RPG had missed Leonard by 6 inches, had hit the wall behind them, showering them both with concrete and shrapnel, had killed the medic who'd been trying to reach them. And Miguel, who'd just saved Leonard's life for the 2nd time, had died 90 seconds later. "Not your fault," he'd said with his last breath, his hand gripping Leonard's with surprising strength. "Never your fault, Leo. Tell Maria I love her. Tell her I was thinking about her tamales." Then the grip had loosened. The light had gone out of Miguel's eyes, and Leonard had been alone in that hellfire with his best friend's body in a mission that still needed completing. He'd held the position for 6 hours. One man, wounded, surrounded, calling in coordinates and directing fire support while Miguel's blood dried on his hands. He'd held it because 43 Americans needed him to hold it. Because Miguel had died saving him, and that death had to mean something. Because letting go meant letting Miguel die for nothing. They'd extracted all 43 hostages. 0 additional casualties on the American side. The mission had been classified as a complete success. Leonard had received a Silver Star, a promotion to captain, and commendations that would follow him for the rest of his career. Nobody had asked him what it cost. Nobody had asked about the 6 hours spent next to Miguel's body. Nobody had asked about the promises he'd whispered to a dead man in the darkness, while explosions lit up the sky. In the hospital bed, tears ran down Leonard's face. His lips moved, forming words that came out as barely audible whispers. "Still here, Miguel. Still here, brother. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." His hands pressed against his chest, as if trying to hold back bleeding that had stopped 35 years ago. The monitors shrieked. Somewhere far away, someone was calling his name. The fever dream shifted. Now he was at the funeral. Los Angeles, January 1990. Miguel's sister Maria, 23 years old, wearing black, her face swollen from crying. She'd hugged Leonard so tight he could barely breathe. "It's not your fault," she'd said, echoing her brother's last words. "Miguel loved you. He would have done anything for you." Leonard had given her Miguel's dog tags, had told her what Miguel's last words were, had promised to check on her, to make sure she was okay, to honor Miguel's memory by living a life worth saving. He'd kept that promise for 16 years, had sent money when she needed it, had attended her nursing school graduation, had walked her down the aisle at her wedding when her father refused, had held her firstborn son, named Miguel after his uncle, and promised to be the godfather the boy deserved. Then Beth had died, and Leonard had broken every promise he'd ever made, including the ones to Miguel's sister. The fever pulled him deeper. Now he was at Beth's funeral, a service he'd missed because he'd been in Kandahar, pinned down in a valley that wasn't supposed to have Taliban presence, fighting an enemy that wasn't supposed to exist. His daughters, 24 years old, standing beside the casket without him. His commander had pulled strings to get him home, but by the time Leonard landed stateside, Beth was already buried. His daughters had planned the service themselves, had chosen the flowers and the music and the words, had stood there without their father because their father had chosen his country over his family one too many times. When he'd finally made it home, Jessica and Amanda had been in the house they'd grown up in, packing their mother's belongings. They'd looked at him with eyes that held something worse than anger. They'd looked at him with nothing. Empty. Done. "Where were you?" Jessica had asked. Not accusing, just asking like she was curious about a fact. "I came as soon as I could," he'd said. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mom died asking for you," Amanda had said. "She held on for 3 days. The doctors said she was waiting for you to come home." Leonard had tried to explain the mission, the classified nature, the impossibility of leaving when lives were on the line. But the words had sounded hollow even to him. "You always chose them over us," Jessica had said quietly. "The army, the missions, the brothers who needed you. And we understood. We tried to understand. But Mom needed you, and you weren't here." They'd left that night. Both of them had gone back to their lives and their careers and their own grief, had stopped answering his calls within a week, had returned his letters unopened within a month. He tried for 6 months to reach them, had gone to their apartments, to their workplaces, to the places they used to love. But they'd made themselves clear. They were done waiting for a father who would never choose them first. So Leonard had written them a note, had told them he loved them, had told them to live their lives and be happy and not waste time looking for him, had told them their mother would be proud of the women they'd become. Then he'd walked away from the only thing he'd ever loved more than his service. Had walked away because he'd finally understood what Miguel had tried to tell him in those last 90 seconds. You couldn't save everyone. You couldn't be everyone's hero. Sometimes you had to choose, and Leonard had chosen wrong so many times that he'd lost the right to choose at all. In the hospital bed, his fever peaked. His body shook with chills despite feeling like he was burning. The monitors screamed their urgent warnings. Nurses flooded into the room. Someone was taking his blood pressure. Someone else was adjusting his pushing medications. Voices talked over him, around him, about him. Clinical terms, treatment plans, the efficient language of emergency medicine. But Leonard was somewhere else. He was in a jungle in Panama, holding pressure on a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. He was in a cemetery in Los Angeles, promising Maria that Miguel's death meant something. He was in an empty house in suburban Virginia, reading a note his daughters had left that said they couldn't do this anymore. His lips moved. The nurses couldn't hear what he was saying, couldn't hear the coordinates he recited like a prayer. Couldn't hear the names he whispered to ghosts who never answered back. Miguel, Beth, Jessica, Amanda. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I tried. God knows I tried. Still here, he breathed. Still trying. But the truth he'd carried for 6 years on the streets, was that he didn't know why he was still here. Didn't know what he was trying for. Miguel was dead. Beth was dead. His daughters had moved on without him. The man he'd been, the captain who'd held positions and saved lives and earned medals, that man was dead too. All that was left was this. A body that wouldn't quit. A heart that kept beating out of habit. And memories that played on endless loop every time the fever rose high enough to pull him under. The medication hit his system. The fever began to break. The jungle faded. The cemetery dissolved. The empty house disappeared. Leonard opened his eyes to fluorescent lights and concerned faces and the knowledge that he'd survived again when part of him still wasn't sure he should. A young doctor, not Kessler, was standing beside his bed. You gave us quite a scare there, Mr. Whitaker. Your temperature spiked dangerously high. We've adjusted your antibiotics. You should start seeing improvement soon. Thank you, sir, Leonard whispered. The doctor left. The nurses followed. The room settled back into its normal rhythm of beeps and whispers and the endless waiting that defined hospital time. Leonard turned his head toward the window. Outside, the afternoon sun was painting everything gold. Tomorrow would be Jessica's 30th birthday. She'd celebrate without him, the way she had for the last 6 years. And he'd be here, still breathing, still carrying weight that belonged to dead men, still trying to figure out if survival was victory or just a different kind of failure. His fingers found the dog tags around his neck, found Miguel's tags underneath his own. 2 names, 2 serial numbers, 1 promise broken and 1 promise kept, depending on how you counted. Still here, brother, he whispered to the afternoon light. Still trying, even if he'd long since forgotten what he was trying for. Emma Reeves had been working in veteran outreach for 12 years, and she'd learned to recognize the calls that mattered. The voicemail from Eduardo Martinez, a former ranger she'd helped transition 3 years ago, had that quality. Urgency without panic. Concern without drama. The tone of someone who'd seen enough to know when something was wrong. She'd listened to it twice, standing in the parking lot of the VA clinic where she ran her reintegration program. Then she'd gotten in her car and driven straight to County General. The program Emma ran wasn't official VA. It existed in the spaces between bureaucracy and need, funded by private donations and staffed by volunteers who understood that some veterans couldn't navigate the system because the system had failed them too many times. No paperwork, no waiting lists, just a bed, hot meals, and people who'd been where you were and made it through to the other side. She found Eduardo on the 2nd floor, pushing his mop bucket with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd learned to blend into backgrounds. He saw her coming and nodded toward room 212. Bed 4, he said quietly. Leonard Whitaker. They're treating him like he's nobody. But something about him, Emma, the way he holds himself, the way he says sir and ma'am like it's automatic. The scars. And he's got dual tags. Emma felt something tighten in her chest. Dual tags meant carrying a fallen brother. Meant surviving when someone else didn't. Meant guilt that could eat you alive if you let it. Tell me what you saw, she said. Eduardo described it all. The precise way Leonard arranged his belongings. The controlled breathing despite obvious pain. The courtesy in the face of contempt. Dr. Kessler's dismissive comments. The medical student's uncomfortable reactions. The dog tag worn smooth from decades of wear. He's alone, Eduardo finished. No emergency contacts. No family. No nothing. And tomorrow's his daughter's birthday. I heard him whisper it during the fever. Jessica, 30 years old tomorrow. Emma absorbed this. A man carrying his daughter's birthday in his fever dreams, but listing no emergency contacts meant estrangement. Meant loss. Meant someone who'd walked away or been pushed away and hadn't found his way back. Thank you for calling me, she said. I'll see what I can do. She walked into room 212 with the confidence of someone who'd been thrown out of better places. The hernia patient was watching television. The teenager with the broken leg was asleep. The elderly woman was quiet for once. And in bed for a man who looked like he'd been assembled from wire and will lay watching the ceiling with eyes that had seen too much. Emma pulled a chair close to his bedside and sat down. She didn't introduce herself yet, just sat there, giving him time to register her presence, to decide if she was threat or help or just another person he'd have to politely endure. "Mr. Whitaker," she said finally, "my name is Emma Reeves. I run a veteran reintegration program. I'm not with the VA. I'm not official anything. I'm just someone who helps when I can." Leonard's eyes shifted to her face, studied her. She was used to that look, the assessment that came automatically to people who'd spent years evaluating threats and allies. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was stronger than she'd expected, given the fever Eduardo had described. "I appreciate you coming, but I don't need charity." "That's good," Emma said, "because I don't do charity. I do practical help for people who've served and fallen through cracks. No judgment. No paperwork unless you want it. Just options. I have options, ma'am." "Do you?" She kept her voice gentle. "Eduardo told me you have no emergency contacts listed. No family being notified. You're going to be discharged in a day or two, and from what I understand, you'll be going back to the streets." Leonard said nothing, but something in his eyes confirmed it. "I'm not here to save you," Emma continued. "I'm not here to fix you or pity you or tell you what to do. I'm here to tell you there's a bed in a clean room if you want it. Hot meals. No strings. You can stay one night or 1 month. You can leave anytime. The only rule is no drugs, no violence, and you treat the other residents with respect." "What's the catch?" Leonard asked. "No catch. We're funded by private donations. Some of the staff are volunteers. Some are veterans themselves. We help people get back on their feet, find work if they want it, navigate the VA if they're ready, or just give them a safe place to heal, whatever they need." "Why?" His question was direct. "Why do you do this?" Emma met his gaze steadily. "Because I had a brother who came back from Iraq and the VA lost his paperwork 3 times. He lived on the streets for 2 years before he walked into traffic on the interstate. He left a note that said he was tired of being invisible. So I started a program to make sure other veterans know they're not invisible, that someone sees them." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Leonard's hands moved to touch the dog tags around his neck. The gesture was unconscious, automatic. "I'm sorry about your brother, ma'am," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry about whoever those extra tags belong to," Emma replied. Leonard's fingers stilled on the metal. His face showed nothing, but his eyes gave him away. The shock of being seen, of being understood, of meeting someone who knew what the weight meant because they'd carried their own version of it. Before he could respond, the door opened. Dr. Kessler strode in with his tablet and his air of perpetual hurry. He stopped when he saw Emma sitting beside Leonard's bed. "Visiting hours are in the afternoon," he said. "Who are you?" "Emma Reeves, Veteran Outreach." She stood, extending her hand. Dr. Kessler didn't take it. "I'm here about Mr. Whitaker's discharge planning. He's not being discharged yet." Kessler pulled up the chart on his tablet. "And when he is, social services will handle placement. I run a medical respite program specifically for veterans. We have staff qualified to monitor his recovery. It would free up this bed faster than waiting for a shelter with medical capacity." Kessler's expression suggested he was calculating the efficiency metrics. A bed freed up was a bed available for someone with better insurance and better outcomes. "Fine," he said. "Have him evaluated by social services. If they approve the placement, he can go there instead of a shelter." He looked at Leonard for the first time. "That acceptable to you?" Leonard glanced from Kessler to Emma and back. "Yes, sir, if it helps with your bed availability." The slight emphasis on your bed availability wasn't lost on Emma. Kessler didn't seem to notice or didn't care. "Good." He made a note on his tablet. "Social services will come by this afternoon." He left without another word. Emma sat back down. She could see Leonard processing, deciding. She'd learned not to push. Veterans who'd survived as long as he had were experts at reading people. If she pushed too hard, if she seemed too eager, if anything felt off, he'd refuse out of pure instinct. "The program's in a converted motel," she said, keeping her tone conversational. 24 rooms, each one private. Bathroom, bed, desk. We have a common area for meals, group sessions if you want them. Medical staff on site. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe. How long can people stay? As long as they need to. We've had guys there for a week, guys there for 6 months. Depends on what they're working toward. And if I don't want to work toward anything, then you get a safe place to sleep and regular meals until you figure out what you do want. Or until you decide you'd rather be somewhere else. Like I said, no strings. Leonard was quiet for a long moment. His fingers traced the edge of the photograph in the plastic bag on his bedside table. Emma didn't ask about it. Didn't ask about the daughters Eduardo had mentioned or the birthday tomorrow or any of it. Some things people told you when they were ready. Other things they never told you at all. I'll think about it, ma'am, Leonard said finally. That's all I'm asking. Emma stood, pulled a card from her pocket, and set it on the bedside table. That's got my direct number. You can call any time, day or night. Even if you just want to talk. Even if you decide you don't want the bed. I'm here. She turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Whitaker, whatever weight you're carrying, whatever you think you don't deserve, that's between you and your conscience. But you deserve medical care. You deserve recovery. You deserve a chance to figure out what comes next. You earn that much. Leonard looked at her with those gray eyes that had seen too much. Ma'am, with respect, I'm not sure what I've earned anymore. Then maybe it's time to find out, Emma said gently. She left him there, staring at her card like it was a grenade he couldn't decide whether to throw or hold on to. In the hallway, she found Eduardo waiting. How'd it go? He asked. He's thinking about it. That's more than some of them give me. She looked back toward room 212. Keep an eye on him. Call me if anything changes. And Eduardo, thank you for seeing him. For not walking past. We don't leave brothers behind, Eduardo said. It was automatic. The code they'd all been taught. The promise that was supposed to last forever, but somehow got forgotten when the uniforms came off. Emma drove back to the program's facility and spent the afternoon preparing. Made sure the best room was clean and ready. Stocked it with extra blankets because men who'd lived on the streets were always cold. Put fresh flowers in a vase because sometimes beauty mattered more than people realized. Left a note on the desk that said, "Welcome home." She didn't know if Leonard would come. Didn't know if he could let himself accept help. But she'd learned years ago that all you could do was offer. The rest was up to them. That night, before she went home, she stopped by the memorial wall in the facility's common area. Names of veterans who'd stayed there, who'd moved on to better things, who'd rebuilt their lives from nothing. And names of veterans who hadn't made it, who'd lost the fight before help could reach them. Her brother's name was there. Thomas Reeves, Purple Heart, Iraq veteran, beloved son and brother. She touched his name the way she did every night. Still trying, Tommy. Still trying to make it mean something. Somewhere across the city, in a hospital bed, another veteran was carrying his own dead, making his own promises to ghosts. Trying to figure out if survival was worth the effort when everyone you promised to come home to was gone. Emma couldn't save them all, but she could offer a bed and a meal and a person who understood. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it wasn't. But it was all she had to give, so she gave it anyway. Still trying, she whispered to her brother's name. It was the only promise left worth keeping. Eduardo Martinez came back during his lunch break. He wasn't supposed to. His supervisor had already given him a warning about spending too much time on the second floor when his assigned area was the third and fourth. But some things mattered more than keeping your supervisor happy. He found Leonard awake, sitting slightly upright in bed, the oxygen cannula still in place, but his color better than it had been that morning. The fever had broken, at least for now. His eyes were clearer, more focused. They tracked Eduardo's approach with the awareness of someone who'd spent years watching perimeters. Eduardo pushed his mop bucket to the far corner of the room, giving himself an excuse to be there. The other patients paid him no attention. The maintenance staff were invisible in hospitals, just like they'd been invisible in forward operating bases. People who kept things running while everyone else focused on more important work. He moved closer to Leonard's bed, pretending to check the trash can beside it. Up close, he could see the tattoo on Leonard's shoulder more clearly now. The hospital gown had shifted during the night, revealing more of the faded ink. It was a special forces crest. The arrowhead and dagger. De oppresso liber inscribed andernet. Eduardo's breath caught. He'd suspected, but seeing it confirmed was something else entirely. Special Forces didn't just hand out those crests. You earned that ink through selection, through training that broke most men who tried, through service in places that didn't officially exist. Leonard's eyes opened. He looked directly at Eduardo, and in that moment, they both knew the game was over. They'd been circling each other all morning, two veterans recognizing something in each other, but not yet speaking aloud. 75th Ranger Regiment, Eduardo said quietly. 3rd Battalion, Afghanistan, 2 deployments. Leonard studied him for a long moment. Then, equally quiet, Special Forces, multiple deployments. Panama, through Afghanistan. The words hung between them. Not a competition, not a comparison, just recognition. The kind that happened when you met someone who understood what it meant to serve in the places where policy became blood and good intentions became body counts. Panama, Eduardo repeated. His eyes went to the dog tags around Leonard's neck. December 20th, 1809. Leonard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You know it. Studied it at Ranger School. The extraction at Modelo Prison. One captain held a position for 6 hours against superior forces while calling in fire support. Saved 43 American hostages. Lost 2 men in his team. Eduardo paused. That was you. It wasn't a question. Leonard didn't answer anyway. He looked away, toward the window where afternoon light was painting the room in shades of gold. I didn't come here to talk about old wars, Leonard said finally. Neither did I. Eduardo pulled a chair close, sat down. I came because I've seen what happens when we forget our brothers. When they fall through the cracks, and nobody notices until it's too late. I'm Fine. You're in a hospital with severe pneumonia and no emergency contacts. That's not fine. Leonard's hands moved to the dog tags again. That unconscious gesture, fingers tracing metal worn smooth by decades. Eduardo had seen it before. On himself, in the mirror, during the first year after he'd gotten out. The constant need to touch something that proved you'd been somewhere, done something, mattered to someone. Those extra tags, Eduardo said, nodding toward Leonard's chest. Who was he? For a moment, Leonard didn't respond. Then, so quietly Eduardo almost missed it, Miguel Santos. Captain, my best friend. December 20th, 1989. Panama City. I'm sorry. Don't be. He died saving my life. I've spent 35 years trying to figure out if I've done anything worth him dying for. The honesty of it hit Eduardo somewhere deep. That was the question, wasn't it? The one that kept you up at 3 a.m. The one that followed you from the battlefield to the streets to wherever you ended up. Were you worth it? Were you worth the brothers who died? Were you worth the sacrifice? Were you worth saving? Before Eduardo could respond, the door opened. The medical student from this morning, the young woman with dark hair, pulled back, entered with a tablet. She looked nervous, like she wasn't sure she should be there. Mr. Whitaker? Her voice was hesitant. I'm Kia Petit. I'm a 4th-year medical student. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions. For my patient assessment. Leonard nodded. Of course, ma'am. She approached the bedside, and Eduardo started to stand, but she gestured for him to stay. It's fine. This would just take a minute. She asked the standard questions. Pain level, breathing difficulty, appetite. But Eduardo noticed her looking at Leonard differently than she had during Dr. Kessler's rounds. Like she was actually seeing him instead of just cataloging symptoms. When she finished the clinical questions, she hesitated. Then, can I ask you something personal, Mr. Whitaker? You can ask, ma'am. Can't promise I'll answer. This morning, when Dr. Kessler was talking about homeless populations and lifestyle choices, you said with respect. You said, sir. You maintained courtesy even when he was being, she paused, looking for the right word, dismissive. Leonard waited. She wasn't asking a question yet, just working up to it. I noticed your bearing, she continued. The way you hold yourself, the scars on your arms, the dog tags. And I wondered, she glanced at Eduardo, then back to Leonard, what your story was. Because I don't think it's the story Dr. Kessler assumed. Leonard was quiet for a moment. Then, ma'am, with respect, everyone's got a story. Some of us just ended up in different chapters than we expected. But your chapter included military service. Significant military service based on those scars. Yes, ma'am. 22 years. Special Forces. Kira Patel's eyes widened slightly. She looked at the chart in her hands, then back at Leonard. Does Dr. Kessler know that? I didn't put on the intake form. Leonard's voice was flat. It's not relevant to treating pneumonia. It's relevant to understanding the person you're treating, Kira said. It's relevant to, she stopped, clearly struggling with something, to not making assumptions about people based on their current circumstances. Eduardo watched this exchange with growing respect for the medical student. She was young, probably mid-20s, but she had something a lot of doctors never developed. The ability to see past the presentation to the person underneath. May I see the tattoo? She asked. On your shoulder? I saw part of it this morning, but I couldn't make it out clearly. Leonard hesitated, then shifted the hospital gown to reveal the full crest. The arrowhead, the dagger, the Latin motto, and underneath, newer ink, less faded. Coordinates, a date. Initials MS. Kira leaned in, studying it. Those coordinates, what do they mark? Panama City, Leonard said quietly. Well, my best friend died. December 20th, 1989. She straightened up, her professional composure cracking slightly. Mr. Whitaker, I'm going to document this conversation in your chart. Your service record. Your circumstances. I'm going to make sure it's part of your medical file so that everyone who treats you understands who you are. Ma'am, I'd rather you didn't. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything, Kira said with surprising firmness. You're not just a homeless pneumonia patient. You're a veteran with significant service history, and you deserve to be treated with the respect that service earned. With respect, ma'am, Leonard said, and Eduardo heard something in his voice, some old pains surfacing. I stopped deserving respect when I walked away from my family. When I chose to survive on the streets instead of accepting help. When I became the kind of person who gets talked about in clinical terms as a lifestyle choice. The room went quiet. Even the elderly woman across the room had stopped calling out. Kira looked at Leonard with something that might have been understanding or might have been the beginning of it. Mr. Whitaker, she said softly, I don't know what led you to the streets. I don't know what you're carrying or what you've lost. But I know that 22 years of service doesn't just evaporate because you fell on hard times. I know that whatever brought you here, you still deserve dignity. You still deserve care. You still deserve someone giving a damn about what happens to you. She left then, but not before Eduardo saw her pull out her phone, saw her typing something, saw the determination on her face that suggested DR. Kessler's rounds tomorrow morning were going to be very different. Eduardo and Leonard sat in silence for a moment after she left. Then Eduardo said, she's right, you know, about deserving dignity, about deserving care. Leonard's fingers went back to the dog tags. I've got 2 daughters out there somewhere. Jessica and Amanda. They're 30 now. Both doctors. I haven't seen them in 6 years. Haven't spoken to them. They don't want to hear from me. And I don't blame them. Because you walked away? Because I wasn't there when their mother died. Because I chose the mission over being there. Because I broke every promise I ever made to them. Leonard's voice was steady, but Eduardo could hear the weight underneath. I left them a note 6 years ago. Told them to live their lives. Told them not to look for me. And they listened. You could reach out now. And say what? That I'm sorry? That I've been living under a bridge for 6 years because I couldn't figure out how to live without their mother? That I'm in a hospital being talked about like I'm a waste of resources? He shook his head. They're better off without me. Are they? Or are you just afraid of finding out you're wrong? The question hung in the air. Leonard didn't answer. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the room in orange and gold. Somewhere in the city, 2 daughters were living their lives, unaware that their father was 12 floors up and 3 miles away, carrying their birthday in his fevered dreams and their faces in a worn photograph. Eduardo stood. The woman who came by earlier, Emma Reeves. She's good people. Her program actually works. No bullshit, no bureaucracy. Just help. I know, Leonard said. So what are you waiting for? Leonard looked at him with those gray eyes that had seen too much. I'm waiting to figure out if I deserve it. Eduardo had been there, had stood in that same place asking that same question. The only answer he'd found was that deserving had nothing to do with it. You either accepted help or you didn't. You either chose to keep trying or you gave up. Those were the only real choices left. Deserves got nothing to do with it, Eduardo said. You just decide if you want to keep surviving or if you want to start living. That's all. That's the whole thing. He left Leonard there, staring at Emma's card on the bedside table, at the photograph of his daughters, at the dog tags carrying 2 names and 1 promise that had lasted longer than any marriage vow. And somewhere in the hospital's computer system, a medical student was typing up notes that would change everything. The night shift brought a different rhythm to the hospital. Quieter, darker, the kind of quiet where you could hear your own thoughts too clearly, where memories pressed in close, and there was nothing to do but endure them. Leonard lay in the darkness and listened to his roommates breathe. The hernia patient snored softly. The teenager with the broken leg mumbled in his sleep. The elderly woman had finally stopped calling for her daughter, medicated into silence. And Leonard stared at the ceiling tiles he'd memorized during the fever dreams and thought about choices. He could leave. The 4 was just saline now, easy enough to remove. His clothes were in the plastic bag, worn and patched, but functional. He could walk out of this hospital the same way he'd walked away from everything else. Disappear back into the city's shadows where nobody asked questions and nobody expected answers. He'd done it before. After Beth's funeral, after his daughters had made it clear they were done waiting for a father who would never put them first. He'd walked away from the house they'd bought together, from the life they'd built, from every promise he'd ever made. He'd left a note and disappeared, and he'd gotten very good at being invisible. It would be easy to do it again, to refuse Emma's help, to decline the bed and the meals and the kindness that felt like charity even though she'd promised it wasn't, to go back to the bridge and the blanket and the daily walk to Beth's grave where he could apologize to someone who couldn't answer back. Easy, familiar, safe in its own terrible way. But something kept him in that bed. Not the illness, though his lungs still ached with each breath. Not the monitors or the medical staff or the threat of being chased down if he tried to leave against medical advice. Something else. Something that had started when Emma Reeves sat beside his bed and told him about her brother. When Eduardo Martinez recognized the tattoo and understood what the dual tags meant. When Kira Patel looked at him like he was a person instead of a problem. Someone was seeing him. Multiple someones. And he hadn't been really seen in 6 years. His hand moved to the photograph in the plastic bag. He pulled out carefully, holding it in the dim light from the hallway. Jessica and Amanda at 13, smiling in their soccer uniforms, arms around each other. Identical twins who'd shared everything. A womb, a birthday, a father who kept leaving, and a mother who kept waiting and eventually stopped. Today was Jessica's birthday, 30 years old. He wondered what she was doing. If Amanda had flown in from Stanford, if they were together somewhere, celebrating, talking about their lives and their work and everything they'd accomplished without him. He wondered if they ever talked about him at all, or if he'd become what he'd asked them to become. A memory they'd moved past, a father-shaped absence they'd learned to live around. The guilt rose up like it always did. The familiar weight of every wrong choice, every missed moment, every promise broken. He'd missed soccer games because of deployments, missed school plays because of training, missed Beth's cancer diagnosis because he'd been in Kandahar, missed her funeral because he'd been pinned down in a valley saving strangers while his wife died asking for him. And when he'd finally come home, when he'd finally tried to be there, his daughters had looked at him with eyes that held no anger. Just emptiness. Just the exhausted realization that he would always choose something else over them. So he'd left, had written them a note telling them to be happy, to live their lives, to not waste time looking for someone who'd proven over and over he wasn't worth finding. But now, holding their photograph in a hospital bed while strangers offered him help he didn't deserve, Leonard wondered if he'd gotten it wrong. If walking away had been one more choice in a lifetime of wrong choices. If the real cowardice wasn't failing them. It was not trying to make it right. He could call them. Emma had offered him her phone. He could find their numbers. Could tell them he was alive. Could tell them he was sorry. Could tell them he thought about them every single day and carried their faces in his pocket and whispered their names in the dark. Could tell them their father was a broken man in a hospital bed being treated like trash, and maybe they'd been right to let him go. The thought made him put the photograph away. No, they were better off. They had good lives, important work. They were saving children while their father couldn't even save himself. The last thing they needed was a reminder of what they'd lost, of what he'd never been able to be. Sarah Chun appeared in the doorway, her shift just starting. She moved quietly through the room, checking on each patient. When she reached Leonard's bed, she paused. "Can't sleep, Mr. Whitaker?" "No, ma'am. Too much sleep during the day, I think." She checked his vitals, adjusted his blanket. "Your fever stayed down. That's good. The antibiotics are working." "Thank you, ma'am." She pulled up a chair, surprising him. "I saw Ms. Reeves' card on your table. Are you going to take her up on the offer?" "I don't know yet, ma'am. Can I tell you something?" Sarah's voice was soft. "I've worked in this ER for 7 years. I've seen a lot of people come through. People who need help and can't ask for it. People who think they don't deserve it. People who've convinced themselves that suffering alone is somehow noble." Leonard said nothing, but he listened. "You know what I've learned? Accepting help isn't weakness. It's not giving up. It's just deciding you're worth the effort trying." She paused. "And you are worth it, Mr. Whitaker. Whatever brought you here, whatever you're carrying, you're worth someone caring what happens to you." She stood then, but before leaving, she said, "Tomorrow's someone's birthday, isn't it? I heard you say the name during the fever." "Jessica." Leonard's throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am. My daughter. She's 30 tomorrow. Have you told her you're here?" "She doesn't want to hear from me, ma'am. I made sure of that 6 years ago." "Are you sure? Or is that just what you're afraid of?" It was the second time in 12 hours someone had asked him that question. First Eduardo, now Sarah. Both of them seeing past his defenses to the fear underneath. The terror that his daughters would confirm what he already believed. That he wasn't worth waiting for. That they'd moved on. That the hole he'd left in their lives had healed over, and his return would only reopen wounds better left closed. "I'm sure," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah left him then, moving on to her other patients. Leonard lay in the darkness and thought about Jessica turning 30. About Amanda, who was probably with her. About 2 women who'd grown up without him and learned to be extraordinary anyway. About whether redemption was even possible when you'd failed the people who needed you most. His chest tightened, and it wasn't the pneumonia. It was grief, raw and overwhelming. For Miguel who'd died saving him. For Beth who'd died without him. For his daughters who'd learned to live without him. For the man he'd been before he'd carried so much death that he'd forgotten how to carry life. He reached for the dog tags. For Miguel's initials stamped in metal. For the coordinates that marked the place where everything had gone wrong. For the weight he'd carried for 35 years because letting it go felt like betrayal. "Still here, brother," he whispered to Miguel's ghost. Still trying. But what was he trying for? What was survival worth when everyone worth surviving for was gone? The phone number on Emma's card seemed to glow in the darkness. A lifeline he could reach for. A chance to stop running, stop hiding, stop pretending that suffering alone was somehow paying a debt he owed to the dead. Leonard picked up the card, held it, felt the weight of the choice. Accept help and risk hope. Risk trying, risk failing again, or refuse and go back to the familiar safety of nothing, of existing without living, of breathing without purpose beyond the daily ritual of apologizing to ghosts. His fingers touched the photograph one more time. Jessica and Amanda at 13, when he'd still been their hero. When they'd still looked at him like he could do anything. Before he'd proven over and over that he couldn't do the one thing that mattered. Be there. Tomorrow was Jessica's birthday. In some restaurant or home somewhere in this city, she'd turn 30. She'd blow out candles. She'd make wishes. And her father would be 12 floors up and 3 miles away, holding a photograph from 17 years ago and trying to decide if he deserved a second chance he'd never asked for. The choice sat in his chest like a stone, like shrapnel, like all the weight he'd carried for all the years since Panama, since Beth, since the note he'd left telling his daughters to forget him. Maybe it was time to put it down. Maybe it was time to try. Maybe Eduardo was right and deserve had nothing to do with it. You just chose to keep surviving or start living. Leonard looked at Emma's card one more time, at Sarah's kind face as she moved through the ward, at Eduardo's words echoing in his memory, at Kira's determination to make sure he was seen as more than a homeless pneumonia case, at all these strangers who'd looked at him and decided he was worth the effort of caring. Maybe they saw something he couldn't. Maybe they understood something about worth and redemption that 6 years on the streets had made him forget. Maybe the greatest betrayal wasn't accepting help. It was refusing it, refusing to try, giving up on the possibility that the man he'd been wasn't completely dead. He set the card down beside the photograph. Tomorrow he'd decide. Tomorrow, on his daughter's birthday, he'd choose whether to keep running or finally stop. Tonight, he just closed his eyes and whispered one more promise to the ghosts. Still here, still trying, and maybe, finally, try for something more than just survival. Morning came too quickly. Leonard woke to find Dr. Kessler standing at the foot of his bed with a different energy than usual. The residents flanking him looked nervous. The medical students, including Kira Patel, stood slightly apart from the main group, watching with an intensity that suggested something had changed overnight. "Mr. Whitaker," Kessler began, his voice carrying less of its usual dismissive edge. "I've reviewed your chart. Your fever has remained stable for 24 hours. Your chest X-ray shows improvement. Your oxygen saturation is good. We'll be discharging you this afternoon, pending final clearance." "Yes, sir," Leonard said. "Thank you." Kessler hesitated, consulting his tablet. "I see that Ms. Reeves from the Veteran Respite Program has arranged placement for you. Social Services approved it. You'll be transferred there directly from the hospital." "That's correct, sir." Another pause. Kessler seemed to be wrestling with something. "Finally, I also see that additional information has been added to your chart regarding your service record." Leonard's eyes flicked to Kira, who stood with her tablet clutched against her chest, chin raised slightly. "Yes, sir. That would be accurate. 22 years. Special Forces. Multiple deployments including Panama, Desert Storm, Afghanistan." Kessler read it like he was confirming coordinates he didn't trust. "Silver Star. Bronze Star with Valor. Purple Heart ×3. The room had gone very quiet. The other patients were listening now. The hernia patient had stopped scrolling his phone. The teenager's mother had lowered her magazine. Even the elderly woman seemed more alert, as if sensing something important was happening. "That's correct, sir," Leonard repeated. "Why didn't you mention this during intake?" Leonard met Kessler's eyes steadily. "With respect, sir, it wasn't relevant to treating pneumonia. And in my experience, telling people about service doesn't change how they see homeless veterans. It just makes them uncomfortable." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water. Ripples spread outward. One of the residents looked down at her shoes. A medical student shifted uncomfortably. Kessler's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Before Kessler could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, synchronized, the kind of footsteps that carried purpose and couldn't be ignored. Eduardo appeared in the doorway first, still in his maintenance coveralls, but standing differently now. Straighter, at attention. Behind him, a figure in civilian clothes moved with the kind of bearing that made everyone in the room instinctively straighten. The man was in his 60s, gray-haired, stocky, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades making hard decisions. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, but the way he carried himself suggested authority that had nothing to do with uniform or rank. His eyes swept the room, cataloging everything in seconds, before settling on Leonard in bed 4. Eduardo had called First Sergeant Marcus Webb, and Marcus Webb, retired after 30 years in Special Forces, had made some calls of his own. "Captain Whitaker," Webb said. His voice filled the room without being loud. "It's been a long time." Leonard's entire body went rigid. His hands gripped the bed rails. His eyes locked on Webb's face with an intensity that suggested he was seeing a ghost. "First Sergeant Webb," he managed. "Sir." I didn't. He stopped, swallowed. "I didn't know you were in the area." "I'm not. I'm in Colorado." But when Eduardo called about a Special Forces veteran being treated like garbage at County General, I made some inquiries. Webb moved closer to the bed. When I heard the name Leonard Whitaker, I got on a plane. Dr. Kessler found his voice. I'm sorry, who are you? Webb didn't look at him. Kept his eyes on Leonard. First Sergeant Marcus Webb, retired. I served with Captain Whitaker in Desert Storm in Afghanistan. His voice carried weight that made the doctor's questions seem small. I was his team sergeant. Watched him lead men through situations that would have broken anyone else. Leonard's hands were shaking now. Tears had started running down his face, silent, unstoppable. First Sergeant, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to see me like this. Webb pulled a chair close and sat down. Leaned forward so only Leonard could clearly hear him, though his words carried in the silent room. You have nothing to apologize for, Captain. Not to me. Not to anyone. I failed, Leonard whispered. I failed my team. Failed Miguel. Failed my family. Failed everyone who ever believed in me. Miguel Santos died saving your life because that's what brothers do. He knew exactly what he was doing. Webb's voice was firm. And you held that position for 6 hours after he died. You saved 43 Americans. You did your job. You did it better than anyone else could have. But I lived when better men died. That's not failure. That's survival. And what you do with that survival, that's what matters. Webb paused. But I'm not here to rehash old missions. I'm here because one of ours is down and needs extraction. Leonard let out a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. I'm not down, First Sergeant. I'm exactly where I deserve to be. Bullshit. Webb's tone sharpened. You're a decorated combat veteran with severe pneumonia and no support system. That's not justice. That's not what you deserve. That's just what happened. And now we're going to unfuck it. He stood, turned to face Dr. Kessler. I understand you've been providing medical care to Captain Whitaker. For that, you have my gratitude. But I also understand that there's been some, he paused, considering his words, confusion about who he is and what his service means. Kessler's face had gone pale. The information wasn't in the initial chart. It's in there now, Kira Patel said. Her voice was steady despite her obvious nervousness. I documented Captain Whitaker's complete service record yesterday, including his decorations, including the operation at Modelo Prison in Panama, including the fact that he held a position for 6 hours to save American lives. Webb nodded at her. Thank you for that, for seeing what needed to be seen. He turned back to Leonard. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to accept the placement at Ms. Reeves' program. You're going to recover from this pneumonia. And then you and I are going to have a long conversation about what comes next. Because men like you don't end up on the streets because they failed. They end up there because they're carrying weight that's too heavy to carry alone. First Sergeant, I can't, Leonard started. That wasn't a request, Captain. Webb's voice carried the authority of 30 years giving orders that kept men alive. I've already been in contact with Miguel's sister. Maria, remember her? Leonard's breath caught. Yes, sir. She's been looking for you for 4 years. Ever since your daughters reached out to her trying to find you. Webb let that sink in. Your daughters, Captain. Jessica and Amanda. Both doctors. Both successful. Both heartbroken that their father disappeared. Both desperate to know if you're alive. The room swam. Leonard gripped the bed rails harder. They don't want to see me. I left them a note. I told them to move on. They didn't. They've been looking. And Maria's been helping them. Webb pulled out his phone. I have Maria on speed dial. I can call her right now. Tell her you're alive. Tell her you're at County General. She'll have your daughters here in an hour. No. The word came out sharp, panicked. No, sir. Please. I can't. They can't see me like this. I can't. Leonard's breathing was coming faster now. The monitors registered his rising heart rate. Sarah Chun materialized at his bedside, checking his vitals, shooting Webb a look that said back off. Mr. Whitaker, you need to breathe. Slow breaths. You're okay. Webb stepped back, giving him space. I'm not calling anyone without your permission, Captain. But you need to understand something. You're not alone. You never were. We just didn't know where to find you. Leonard closed his eyes, tears still streaming. I thought if I disappeared, if I became nobody, it would be easier. For everyone. Easier for who? Webb asked quietly. For your daughters who've spent 6 years wondering if you're dead? For Maria, who promised her brother she'd look after you? For the brothers who served with you who think you vanished? Who was it easier for, Captain? The question hung in the air. Leonard had no answer, had never had an answer, had just known that the weight of his failures was crushing him, and the only way to stop hurting the people he loved was to remove himself from their lives. Eduardo spoke up from the doorway. I was going to kill myself 3 years ago. I had the pills, had the note written, had everything ready. Webb stepped in, and Marcus Webb was suddenly there. Then Emma Reeves showed up. They didn't fix me, but they gave me a reason to try. That's all anyone needs. A reason to try. Leonard looked at Eduardo, at Webb, at Sarah and Kira, who'd advocated for him, at all these people who'd decided he was worth saving when he decided he wasn't. I don't know how, he whispered. I don't know how to come back from this. From 6 years of nothing. From being the kind of person who lives under a bridge and can't even tell his daughters he's alive. One step at a time, Webb said. First step, you accept the bed at the respite program. Second step, you recover. Third step, we figure out the rest together. Not alone. Never alone again. Leonard's hand moved to the photograph in the plastic bag. To Jessica and Amanda at 13. To the faces he'd memorized during 6 years of apologizing to ghosts. Today's Jessica's birthday, he said. She's 30. I know, Webb said gently. Maria told me. And tomorrow you can decide if you want to wish her happy birthday. But today you just accept help. That's all. Just one choice. Accept help. The room waited. Dr. Kessler and his residents. The medical students. Eduardo. Sarah. All these witnesses to a moment that would determine everything. Leonard looked at Webb. At the first sergeant who'd crossed the country because one of his men was down. At the brother who hadn't forgotten even when Leonard had tried his hardest to be forgotten. Okay, he whispered. Okay, first sergeant. I'll try. Webb's face broke into the first smile Leonard had seen. Outstanding, Captain. Now let's get you out of this hospital and start the real work. He turned to Kessler. When can he be discharged? Kessler, still pale, consulted his tablet. This afternoon, pending final clearance. Make it happen, Webb said. It wasn't a request. And somewhere in the city, 2 daughters went about their birthday celebrations, unaware that their father had just chosen to stop running. That help had found him, that the extraction had begun. Still here, Leonard thought, touching Miguel's dog tags. Still trying, but for the first time in 6 years, trying for something more than just survival. Trying for redemption. The discharge process took 4 hours. Paperwork, final x-rays, medication instructions. A social worker who appeared with forms and questions and the kind of tired compassion that came from processing too many cases with too little time. Leonard sat on the edge of the bed in his street clothes, the worn jeans and patched flannel shirt that had been washed by hospital laundry and came back smelling like industrial detergent instead of the street. His rucksack sat at his feet, packed with the same military precision it had been packed with for 40 years. Everything he owned fit in one bag. Everything that mattered fit in his pockets. Webb had stepped out to make phone calls, but kept checking back, as if afraid Leonard might disappear if left unsupervised. Emma Reeves had arrived an hour ago, quiet and efficient, coordinating with the social worker, ensuring the transfer would be smooth. Eduardo stopped by twice during his shift, just long enough to nod, to confirm Leonard was still there, still choosing to stay. Sarah Chun came by before her shift ended. She brought him a sandwich from the cafeteria, knowing he probably hadn't eaten. You did good, Mr. Whitaker, she said. Accepting help is harder than people think. Thank you, ma'am. For everything. For seeing me. She smiled. That's the job. The real job, anyway. Not just treating symptoms, but seeing the person underneath. After she left, Kira Patel appeared in the doorway. She looked exhausted, like she'd been up all night. May I come in? Of course, ma'am. She pulled up a chair. I wanted to tell you something before you left. After I documented your service record yesterday, I went home and I couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Kessler said. About lifestyle choices. About how we talk about homeless patients like they're problems instead of people. You don't have to apologize for him, ma'am. I'm not apologizing for him. I'm explaining what I did. She pulled out her tablet. I wrote a case study about implicit bias in emergency medicine, about how assumptions based on appearance can lead to substandard care, about how a decorated combat veteran with 22 years of service can be dismissed as a frequent flyer because he presents as homeless. Leonard didn't know what to say. She done that? For him? I submitted it to the medical school journal, and I sent a copy to the hospital's patient advocacy board. She met his eyes directly. What happened to you here shouldn't happen to anyone, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again. Ma'am, I appreciate that, but I don't want to cause trouble. You're not causing trouble. The system caused trouble when it failed you. I'm just documenting it. Her voice was firm. You deserve better. Every veteran deserves better. Every patient deserves better. She stood to leave, then paused. Mr. Whitaker, your daughters. When you're ready, when you decide to reach out, I hope you'll remember that people can surprise you. That maybe the story you've been telling yourself about what they want isn't the whole truth. She left him sitting there, holding the weight of possibilities he'd spent 6 years trying to kill. An hour later, Webb returned with news. I talked to Maria, he said without preamble. Told her you were alive. Told her you were safe. Told her you were getting help. Leonard's hands gripped the edge of the bed. What did she say? She cried. For about 10 minutes. Then she asked if you were ready to talk to Jessica and Amanda. Leonard shook his head. Not yet. I can't, not like this. Not when I'm still. He gestured at himself, at the clothes held together with hope, at the 6 years of failure written on his face. Webb sat down. Let me tell you something about those girls. Maria's kept in touch with them. Sends me updates. Jessica works in pediatrics at County General. This hospital, Captain. She's been working in this building the entire time you've been here and didn't know it. The words hit like a physical blow. Leonard's vision blurred. Jessica, his daughter, in this building, walking these same hallways, possibly treating patients on other floors while her father lay dying 1 floor away. And Amanda, Webb continued, flies in from Stanford once a month. Stays with Maria. They have dinner every visit and talk about you. About memories. About hoping you're alive somewhere. About what they'd say if they ever found you. Leonard couldn't breathe. The weight in his chest wasn't pneumonia anymore. It was 6 years of grief and guilt and the terrible knowledge that he'd put his daughters through hell because he'd been too afraid to face them. They don't hate you, Webb said quietly. They're angry. They're hurt. But they don't hate you. They've been looking for you because they love you. Because you're their father and they want you back. I don't deserve that. Leonard's voice broke. I left them. I walked away when they needed me. You did. Webb's honesty was brutal but necessary. You made the wrong choice. You hurt them. You can't undo that. But you can stop making it worse. You can stop running. You can start trying to make it right. How? How do I make 6 years of abandonment right? You don't. Not all at once. You start with one conversation, one apology, one step toward them instead of away, and then another step, and another, until maybe, eventually, there's enough steps to build a bridge back. The social worker returned with final paperwork. Discharge instructions. Prescription for antibiotics. Follow-up appointment at the clinic. Emma appeared beside her, calm and organized, ready to facilitate the transfer. Ready? Emma asked Leonard. He looked around the room one last time. At the bed where he'd nearly died. At the window where he'd watched the sun set while deciding whether to accept help. At the doorway where Webb had appeared like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to pray. Yes, ma'am. I'm ready. The walk through the hospital was surreal. Past the nurse's station where Sarah worked. Past the ER where he'd been admitted. Through corridors he'd been wheeled through unconscious just days ago. Eduardo met them at the main entrance, having arranged to take his break at discharge time. Brother, he said, gripping Leonard's hand. You got this. One day at a time. One day at a time, Leonard repeated. Webb's rental car was parked outside. Emma's van beside it. They'd coordinated this, Leonard realized. Made sure he wouldn't be alone for any part of the transition. Made sure there were people surrounding him, supporting him, refusing to let him fall back into the darkness. As they loaded his rucksack into Emma's van, a woman in scrubs rushed past them into the hospital. Young, dark hair pulled back, moving with the purposeful speed of medical personnel responding to a page. Leonard's heart stopped. The profile, the way she moved, the determined stride. Jessica, his daughter, 30 years old today, rushing into the hospital where she worked, where she saved children's lives, where she'd become everything he and Beth had dreamed she'd become. He opened his mouth, closed it, watched her disappear through the automatic doors. So close, 12 feet away, close enough to call out, close enough to stop her, close enough to say happy birthday, sweetheart, it's Dad, I'm alive, I'm sorry, I love you. But the words wouldn't come. The 6 years of silence were too heavy, the fear too deep. She disappeared into the hospital, and Leonard stood frozen, one hand on the van door, watching the place where she'd been. Webb had seen it too. That was her. Leonard nodded, unable to speak. You could go after her. Webb's voice was gentle. Right now. Walk back in there. Find her. Leonard shook his head. Not like this. Not when I'm barely holding myself together. Not when I don't have anything to offer her except apologies and excuses. When then? When I'm better. When I can look her in the eye without falling apart. When I have something to show her besides failure. Webb looked like he wanted to argue. But Emma put a hand on his arm. Let him do this his way. Let him get stable first. There's time. Is there? Leonard asked quietly. I thought I had time with Beth. I thought I had time with Miguel. I thought I had all the time in the world, and then I didn't. Then we make time, Webb said firmly. We get you healthy. We get you stable. And then we make the call. Together. Not alone. You don't do this alone anymore. They drove to the respite facility in convoy. Webb following Emma's van. Leonard sat in the passenger seat and watched the city slide past. The neighborhoods he'd walked through. The parks he'd slept in. The library where he'd checked on his daughter's lives from a distance. All of it looked different now. Not because anything had changed, but because he had. Because he'd chosen to stop running. Because help had found him and he'd let it. Emma pulled into the parking lot of a converted motel. 2 stories. Fresh paint. Gardens in front that someone clearly tended with care. A sign that read home again veteran respite program. This is it, Emma said. Your room's on the 2nd floor. Private bathroom. Desk. Bed. Everything you need. Meals are communal if you want them, but you can eat in your room if you prefer. Medical staff checks in daily. No rules except respect and sobriety. Leonard grabbed his rucksack and followed her up the exterior stairs. Room 14. She unlocked it and stepped back, letting him enter first. The room was simple but clean. Double bed with fresh linens. Desk with a lamp. Chair by the window. Bathroom visible through an open door. And on the desk, a vase with fresh flowers and a note that said, "Welcome home." Home. The word felt foreign. He hadn't had a home in 6 years. Hadn't let himself believe he deserved one. I'll give you time to settle in, Emma said. Dinner's at 6 in the common room if you want to join us. No pressure, and I'm just down in the office if you need anything. She left him there. Webb appeared in the doorway a moment later. I'm staying at a hotel 5 minutes away. I'll be here every day until we figure out the next steps. And Captain? He waited until Leonard looked at him. You did good today. Real good. Miguel would be proud. After Webb left, Leonard stood in the center of the room and didn't know what to do. For 6 years, he'd known exactly what to do. Wake up. Walk to the gas station. Visit Beth's grave. Go to the library. Find food. Find shelter. Survive. The routine had been brutal, but familiar. This was different. This was unknown. This was choosing to try instead of just survive. This was accepting that maybe, possibly, he was worth saving. He unpacked his rucksack with the same precision he'd packed it. Everything in its place. Everything ordered. Control in a life that had long since spun beyond his control. At the bottom of the bag, he found a photograph. Jessica and Amanda at 13. And underneath it, folded carefully, the note he'd written them 6 years ago. The one that had told them to move on. To live their lives. To not look for him. He read it now and saw it for what it was. Not protection. Not kindness. Just fear dressed up as sacrifice. Webb's words echoed in his mind. They've been looking for you because they love you. Leonard sat on the bed and held the photograph and the note and tried to imagine a world where he could make this right. Where one conversation could start to build a bridge. Where his daughters might look at him with something other than the emptiness he'd seen in their eyes 6 years ago. Outside the window, the sun was setting. Jessica's 30th birthday was ending. She'd celebrated without him, just like she'd celebrated everything else for 6 years. But tomorrow was coming, and the day after, and all the days that followed. Days when he could choose to keep trying. to keep moving toward them instead of away, to finally stop running. Still here, he whispered to Miguel's ghost, to Beth's memory, to his daughters who didn't know he was alive. Still trying. And this time, maybe, just maybe, try would be enough. Leonard had been at the respite facility for 3 days when Webb decided it was time. He'd spent those days in a fog of recovery and adjustment. The room felt too big after years of sleeping under bridges. The bed too soft. The silence too loud. He'd wake at dawn out of habit, then remember he didn't have anywhere to go. No gas station bathroom. No cemetery visit. No daily apology to Beth's headstone. Just a room with clean sheets and people who checked on him and meals he didn't have to scavenge for. It felt wrong, like he was taking something meant for someone more deserving. But Emma had been patient, had sat with him in the common room and explained that feeling undeserving was normal, that every veteran who came through felt it at first, that accepting help got easier with practice. Webb had been less patient, had shown up every morning with purpose and plans, had talked about next steps, about counseling, about job programs, about reconnecting with the Special Forces community, about all the futures that seemed impossible when you were living under a bridge but became visible once you had 4 walls and regular meals. And every conversation eventually circled back to the same question. When are you going to call them? On the 3rd day, Webb brought someone with him. The woman who walked into the common room was in her late 40s, small and compact, with dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that held grief and strength in equal measure. She wore scrubs printed with cartoon characters, the uniform of a pediatric nurse. And when she saw Leonard sitting by the window, she stopped breathing. "Leo," she whispered. Leonard stood on instinct, though his legs felt unsteady. "Maria." Miguel's sister crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her arms around him. She was tiny, barely reached his chest, but her grip was fierce. She held him while he stood frozen, while 6 years of shame made it impossible to return the embrace, while tears he couldn't control ran down his face. "You idiot," she said into his chest. "You stupid, stubborn idiot. We've been looking for you for 4 years. For years, Leo. Do you know what that's been like?" "I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry, Maria. I thought it was better if I just disappeared." She pulled back enough to look up at his face. Her eyes were wet but fierce. "Better for who? For the girls who thought their father was dead? For me, who promised my brother I'd look after you and then couldn't find you? For yourself, living under a bridge like you didn't matter? I don't matter. Not compared to what Miguel was. What he could have been." Maria's hand connected with his chest, not hard but firm. A push that made him step back. "Miguel died, saving your life because he loved you like a brother. Because that's what we do for the people we love. And you think honoring that sacrifice means throwing your life away? You think that's what he wanted?" Webb stood near the door, arms crossed, letting Maria say what needed saying. Emma had appeared too, quiet and watchful, ready to intervene if needed. "I couldn't save him," Leonard said. "I cleared that building. I should have seen the second team. I should have been faster. You were human. You made a decision based on the information you had. And Miguel made a decision to push you out of the way because he saw that RPG coming and he chose you." Maria's voice shook. "You don't get to dishonor that choice by wasting the life he saved." The words hit like physical blows. Leonard sank back into his chair, hands covering his face. "I don't know how to live with it. With him dying. With Beth dying. With failing everyone." Maria pulled up a chair directly in front of him, sat close enough that he couldn't avoid her eyes. "Let me tell you what Miguel told me once. After Granada, after he saved your life the first time, he said Leo's the best officer I've ever served under. He cares about his men more than he cares about himself. Someday that's going to get him killed, but until then, I'd follow him anywhere." She paused, letting that sink in. "He knew what kind of man you were, Leo. He knew you'd blame yourself if anything happened to him. He told me once, if I ever die in the field, make sure Leo knows it wasn't his fault. Make sure he doesn't carry it." She leaned forward. "I failed that promise for 35 years. I'm not failing it anymore." Leonard's hands dropped. He looked at her through tears he'd stopped trying to hide. "He died because of me. He died doing his job, protecting his brother, making a choice. She reached out and gripped his hands. And now you get to honor that choice by living. Really living. Not just surviving. Not just existing in the shadows. Living. Silence filled the room. Somewhere in the building, someone was cooking. The smell of coffee drifted in. Outside, traffic hummed past. Normal sounds. Life continuing. Finally, quietly, Leonard said, "I saw Jessica 3 days ago. At the hospital. She walked right past me." Maria's grip tightened. "Did you talk to her?" "No. I couldn't. I wasn't ready." "When will you be ready, Leo? When will you decide you deserve to see your daughters?" "When I'm better. When I have something to offer besides apologies." "They don't want something. They want you." Maria pulled out her phone. "I can call them right now. Amanda's flying in tonight for a long weekend. They're having dinner at my place. You could be there." Terror flooded through him. "No, I can't. They won't want to see me like this." "Like what? Alive? Recovering? Trying?" Maria's voice was gentle now. "Leo, they know you've been on the streets. They know you've been struggling. They don't expect you to be perfect. They just want their father back." Webb spoke from the doorway. "I got photos, Captain. Want to see what they look like now?" Before Leonard could answer, Webb was crossing the room with his phone. Pulled up Facebook profiles. Jessica Whitaker, 30 years old, pediatric nurse at County General. Her profile picture showed her holding a newborn, scrubs printed with dinosaurs, smile that looked exactly like Beth's. And Amanda Whitaker, Stanford Medical Center, pediatric oncology fellow. Her photo showed her at a conference presenting research, professional and confident, and so much like her mother it hurt to look at. "They're beautiful," Leonard whispered. "They're so beautiful, just like their mother." "They have a lot of you in them too," Maria said. "Jessica has your stubborn determination. Amanda has your analytical mind. And they both have your heart. That's why they've been looking. That's why they haven't given up." She held out her phone. "One call, Leo. That's all. I tell them you're alive. I tell them you're safe. I ask if they want to see you. And then you let them decide." Leonard stared at the phone like it was an explosive device. "What they say, no. Then you respect that. And you keep getting better. And maybe eventually you try again. But at least you'll know. At least you won't spend another 6 years wondering." Webb moved closer. "The not knowing is killing them, Captain. Every day, they wake up not knowing if you're alive or dead. Every birthday, every Christmas, every random Tuesday, they wonder. You can end that. Right now." Leonard looked from a phone to Maria's face, to Webb's steady presence, to Emma, who'd been quietly observing and now nodded encouragingly. His hands were shaking as he reached for the phone. Took it, felt the weight of it. The weight of one choice that could change everything or destroy what little hope he'd managed to build. Maria's contact list was already open. Jessica's name at the top. Amanda's right below it. 2 calls. 2 daughters. 2 chances to make 6 years of wrong choices into one right one. He selected Jessica's name. Press call before he could change his mind. Put it on speaker so Maria could hear. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. Leonard's heart hammered against his ribs. His finger hovered over the end call button. Then, hello? Jessica's voice. Older than he remembered, but unmistakable. Maria. What's up? Maria looked at Leonard. Gave him a chance to speak. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. 6 years of silence couldn't be broken in one breath. Maria took over. I have someone here who wants to talk to you. Someone I think you've been looking for. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, what do you mean? Jessica, honey. Maria's voice was gentle. Your father's here. He's alive. He's safe. And he wants to talk to you if you're willing to listen. The silence stretched so long Leonard thought the call had dropped. Then a sound. A sharp intake of breath. A broken whisper. Dad? Leonard's vision blurred completely. His voice, when it came out, was barely audible. Happy belated birthday. The sound Jessica made wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh. It was something between grief and relief and shock and joy all at once. Dad. Oh my God. Dad, where are you? Are you okay? Are you hurt? I'm okay. I'm getting help. I'm at a veteran respite center. I'm safe. Why didn't you call? Her voice cracked. Why didn't you tell us you were alive? We've been looking for you for years. Years, Dad. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Jessica. I thought, I thought you were better off without me. Better off? Another sound, definitely a sob this time. Dad, we thought you were dead. We thought we'd lost you like we lost Mom. How's that better? I made a mistake. Leonard's tears were falling freely now. I made so many mistakes. I wasn't there for your mom. I wasn't there for you. I thought leaving would hurt less than watching you hate me. We never hated you. Jessica's voice was fierce through the tears. We were angry. We were hurt. But we never stopped loving you. We never stopped hoping we'd find you. Webb pressed a tissue into Leonard's hand. Emma had moved closer, a steady presence. Maria was crying too, silently, holding Leonard's free hand. Can I see you? Leonard asked. If you want to. If you're willing. I understand if you're not ready. Not ready? Dad, where are you? I'm coming right now. Jessica, you don't have to, he started. She cut him off. Tell me where you are. Right now. Maria gave her the address. Jessica said she'd be there in 20 minutes. Said she was calling Amanda. So they were both coming. Said not to go anywhere. Please don't leave again. Please just stay. When the call ended, Leonard sat holding the phone and shaking. 20 minutes. His daughters would be here in 20 minutes. Would see him in his thrift store clothes and his weathered face and all the visible evidence of 6 years living rough. Would see their father who'd left them and learn he'd been alive this whole time. What if they changed their minds? He asked. What if they get here and realize they don't want this after all? Then we deal with that, Webb said. But you heard her voice, Captain. That wasn't obligation. That was love. Maria squeezed his hand. They're coming, Leo. Your girls are coming. And whatever happens next, you don't face it alone anymore. The next 20 minutes felt like both an eternity in an instant. Leonard washed his face, tried to make himself presentable, changed into the clean clothes Emma had provided, nicer than anything he'd worn in years, but still obviously secondhand. He was standing by the window when the car pulled up. 2 women got out, moving fast, one in scrubs, one in business casual, both with dark hair like their mother, both with his eyes. Jessica and Amanda, 30 years old, beautiful, alive. Here, they were through the door and across the common room before Leonard could prepare himself, before he could build defenses or find the right words. Amanda reached him first, wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. Then Jessica on his other side, both of them holding him, both of them crying, both of them whispering, Dad, Dad, we found you, you're here, you're really here. And Leonard, who'd spent 6 years believing he didn't deserve their love, who'd convinced himself they were better off without him, broke completely, held his daughters for the first time in 6 years, and let himself believe that maybe, possibly, he was worth saving after all. They sat in the common room for 3 hours. Leonard between his daughters on a worn couch that had seen countless reunions and recoveries. Jessica on his right, Amanda on his left, both of them still touching him like they were afraid he'd disappear if they let go. The questions came slowly at first, then faster. Where have you been? Why didn't you call? Did you know we were looking? Are you sick? Are you getting help? Leonard answered as honestly as he could, told them about the bridge, about the daily walks to their mother's grave, about checking their social media from the library, about seeing them succeed and thrive, and thinking they were better off without him. You watched us, Amanda said. Her voice held wonder and hurt in equal measure. You were there the whole time, and we didn't know. I was at your graduations. Both of them. Leonard's voice was quiet. Medical school for you, Jessica. Your residency match ceremony for you, Amanda. I stood in the back. I just wanted to see you one more time. Jessica's grip on his arm tightened. One more time, like you were saying goodbye. I was. Every time. I'd tell myself it was the last time. I'd stop watching. I'd let you go completely. But I couldn't. Leonard looked at his daughters, seeing their mother in both their faces. You were all I had left of her, of the life I'd lost. You could have had us, Amanda said, not as memories, as your daughters. We wanted you back, Dad. I know that now. I didn't know then. Or I knew, but I couldn't believe it. Leonard touched the dog tags under his shirt. When your mother died, and I wasn't there, when I saw how you looked at me at the funeral, I thought I'd broken something that couldn't be fixed. You had, Jessica said with brutal honesty. You broke our trust. You broke our sense of security. We'd spent our whole childhood waiting for you to come home from deployments, always wondering if this time you wouldn't. And then when Mom got sick, when she really needed you, you were gone again. The words hurt, but Leonard didn't flinch from them. You're right. I chose the mission. I chose my duty, and your mother paid the price. We all paid the price, Amanda added. But Dad, that didn't mean we wanted you gone. It meant we needed you to finally choose us, to finally be present instead of deployed. I thought I'd lost that chance, that I'd used up all my chances. That's not how family works, Jessica said. Her medical training made her direct, precise with her words. You don't get a set number of chances that run out. You get as many chances as you're willing to take, as many as we're willing to give. And we never stop being willing. Maria had been sitting quietly with Webb and Emma, giving them space. Now she spoke up. I told them everything, Leo. About Miguel. About Panama. About the guilt you've been carrying. They know. Leonard looked at his daughters. You know about Miguel? Maria told us years ago, Amanda said, when we first reached out to her looking for you. She explained what happened, what you've been carrying. And we understand, Jessica added. We don't agree with your choices, Dad. We don't think leaving us was the right answer. But we understand the weight you were carrying. The guilt, the grief. Understanding doesn't mean we're not angry, Amanda said. We are. We're furious that you left. That you made us think you might be dead. That you spent 6 years on the streets when you could have been with us. Leonard nodded. You have every right to be angry. We do. Jessica's voice was firm. And we're going to need time to work through that. Professional help, probably. Family therapy. All of it. Because what you did, Dad, it hurt us. Deeply. But we also love you, Amanda continued. And we want you in our lives. If you're willing to do the work. If you're willing to actually be present this time, instead of running when things get hard. The conditions were clear. The expectations laid out. They weren't offering unconditional forgiveness. They were offering a chance. A real chance. With boundaries and requirements, and the understanding that love alone wasn't enough. There had to be accountability. Change. Presence. I'm willing, Leonard said. I don't know if I'll be good at it. I don't know if I can be the father you deserve. But I'm willing to try. That's all we're asking, Jessica said. Just try. Show up. Do the work. Webb cleared his throat from across the room. If I may, Captain, the VA has programs for exactly this. Family reintegration counseling. PTSD treatment. All of it covered. Emma's facility can coordinate. Emma nodded. We have a counselor who specializes in family reunification. She's worked with dozens of veterans and their families. I can set up an appointment. Leonard looked at his daughters. Is that what you want? Counseling together? Yes, Amanda said immediately. We need help navigating this. All of us. And you need help with the PTSD, Jessica added. Her nurse's assessment was clinical but caring. The nightmares, the guilt, the survivor's remorse. You can't carry that alone anymore, Dad. I've been carrying it for 35 years. And look where it got you. Jessica's bluntness was her mother's. Under a bridge. Nearly dead from pneumonia. Separated from everyone who loves you. Is that working? No, Leonard admitted. No, it's not working. Then let us help you, Amanda said. Let the professionals help you. Let yourself believe you're worth helping. They talked until the sun set. Made plans. Set boundaries. Jessica and Amanda would visit 3 times a week while Leonard was in the respite program. They'd start family counseling within the week. Leonard would commit to individual therapy, to medical treatment for the pneumonia recovery, to staying in the program until he was stable. And he would not, under any circumstances, disappear again. That was the non-negotiable. If things got hard, if the guilt overwhelmed him, if he felt the urge to run, he would call them. He would reach out to Webb or Emma or Maria. But he would not vanish. I promise, Leonard said. I won't run again. We're going to hold you to that, Jessica said. And if you do try to run, we'll find you. We've gotten good at looking for you. The first visit ended with more tears, with Jessica and Amanda both hugging him tightly before they left, with promises to return in 2 days, with Amanda saying she'd extended her trip, taken leave from Stanford because her father needed her, and that finally took priority. After they left, Leonard sat in the common room while the sun disappeared and darkness settled. Maria sat beside him, quiet presence. Miguel will be happy, she said, that you finally let them back in. I hope so. I know so. She pulled something from her purse. I brought you something. Been carrying it for 4 years, waiting for the day I'd find you. She handed him a small wooden box. Inside, a folded flag. American flag. Ceremonial triangle. And a silver star medal on a ribbon. Miguel's, Maria said. From Panama. They gave it to him posthumously. His citation is in there too. Read it. Leonard's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. Captain Miguel Santos distinguished himself on December 20th, 1989, during Operation Just Cause in Panama City. When his unit came under heavy enemy fire, Captain Santos exposed himself to hostile fire to push a fellow soldier out of the path of an incoming rocket-propelled grenade. His selfless action saved the life of his commanding officer, but cost him his own. Captain Santos' extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service. The citation detailed what Leonard had lived through, what he'd carried, what Miguel had sacrificed. He wanted you to have this, Maria said. In his will, he specified that if he died in combat, his silver star should go to you. He said you'd know what to do with it. Leonard held the medal. The weight of it, the meaning, Miguel's final gift, his final message. You saved my life. Now save yours. There's more, Maria said. She pulled out a letter. Handwritten. Old. I found this in his things after he died. He wrote it before Panama. Like he knew. Like he was preparing. Leonard opened it with trembling hands. Miguel's handwriting. Familiar. Real. Leo, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're blaming yourself. Stop it, brother. I made a choice. I'd make it again. You were the best officer I ever served under. The best friend I ever had. And if I saved your life, I did it because your life is worth saving. Don't waste it. Don't let guilt eat you alive. Live, Leo. Really live. For both of us. Tell my sister I love her. Tell your wife and daughters you love them. And tell yourself that it wasn't your fault. It never was. Semper Fi, brother. Miguel. The words blurred. Leonard read them twice. 3 times. 35 years late, Miguel's final order. Live. Really live. He can rest now, Maria said softly. You both can. That night, Leonard lay in his room at the respite facility. Clean bed. Safe walls. Phone on the nightstand with his daughter's numbers programmed in. Webb down the street. Emma in the office. Eduardo texting to check in. A whole network of people who decided he was worth saving. He touched Miguel's dog tags. Still wore them. Probably always would. But they felt different now. Not like weight. Like connection. Like Miguel was still there, still pushing him forward, still saving his life one more time. Tomorrow he'd start therapy. Start rebuilding. Start learning how to be a father again. Start the long work of healing wounds that had festered for 6 years and longer. But tonight, he let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real hope. The kind that came with accountability and hard work, and people who loved you enough to demand you be better. He pulled out his phone, sent a text to Jessica and Amanda. Thank you for not giving up on me. I love you both. See you in 2 days. The responses came immediately. We love you too, Dad. From both of them. Leonard set the phone down and closed his eyes. In his mind, Miguel was smiling. Beth was at peace, and his daughters were waiting for him to show up, really show up for the first time in 6 years. Still here, brother, he whispered to Miguel's memory. Still trying. But this time, try for the right reasons. For family. For healing. For a life worth the one Miguel had given him. This time, finally try to live. 3 months later, Leonard stood in front of a group of 12 veterans in the common room at Emma's facility. Some fresh off the streets. Some weeks into recovery. All of them carrying weight they didn't know how to put down. This was the part he'd resisted at first. The part where Emma had suggested he help others. Where Webb had reminded him that the best way to honor Miguel's sacrifice was to use his survival for something meaningful. Where his daughters had encouraged him to turn his pain into purpose. My name is Leonard, he said. Call sign was Nomad. 22 years Special Forces. And I spent 6 years living under the Madison Street Bridge because I couldn't figure out how to live with the weight of everyone I'd failed. The men and women in the circle looked at him with recognition. They knew that weight. They all carried versions of it. I lost my best friend in Panama. Watched him die, saving my life. Carried his dog tag for 35 years and believed I didn't deserve to live when he didn't. Leonard's voice was steady now. Practice. Therapy. Repetition. I missed my wife's death because I was deployed. Walked away from my daughters because I thought they were better off without me. Convinced myself that suffering alone was somehow paying a debt I owed to the dead. He paused, looking at each face. Some young, some old, all haunted. I was wrong. About all of it. Suffering alone doesn't honor the dead. It just creates more casualties. More people lost. More families broken. And the debt I thought I owed? The people I'd lost never wanted me to pay it by destroying myself. They wanted me to live. Really live. A younger veteran, maybe 25, raised his hand slightly. How do you do that? Start living again when you don't feel like you deserve it? You stop waiting to deserve it, Leonard said. You just decide to try. One day at a time. One choice at a time. You accept help even when it feels wrong. You show up for therapy even when you'd rather hide. You call someone when the darkness gets too heavy instead of carrying it alone. Does it get easier? A woman in her 40s, Marine Corps tattoo visible on her forearm. Some days, yes. Some days, no. Leonard was honest with him the way Webb and Emma had been honest with him. But it gets different. The weight doesn't disappear. You just learn how to carry it without letting it crush you. And you learn that carrying it with others makes it lighter. After the meeting, Eduardo found him outside. You did good in there, brother. You're helping them. I'm trying. Leonard looked at the building behind them. Emma's program had expanded. More rooms, more staff, more veterans finding their way off the streets. And I'm hoping to do more. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. He pulled out papers from his jacket. An application, filed with the state, for a new nonprofit organization, Nomad's Landing, a program specifically for special operations veterans struggling with reintegration, focused on peer support, family reunification, and breaking the silence around warrior guilt. Webb's funding it, Leonard explained. He found donors in the SF community. Maria is helping coordinate with military families. Emma's providing space and expertise. And I'm going to run it, if they approve the license. Eduardo studied the application. Nomad's Landing. That's good. That's really good. Miguel always said I should do something meaningful after the Army. Leonard touched the dog tags under his shirt. Took me a while to figure out what that was. His phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Still on for dinner tonight? Amanda's making mom's lasagna. Leonard smiled. Wouldn't miss it. See you at 6. Dinner at his daughter's apartment had become a weekly tradition, sometimes twice a week. They'd converted Jessica's spare room into a space for him. Not permanently. Not yet. He still lived at the respite facility, still working through his recovery. But the room was there, waiting, a promise of eventual home. Family therapy had been brutal and necessary. 3 months of weekly sessions where they'd excavated every hurt, every abandonment, every broken promise. Where Jessica and Amanda had been allowed to express their anger without Leonard defending himself. Where he'd learned that apologies without changed behavior were worthless. Where they'd slowly, painfully begun rebuilding trust. The therapist had warned them it would take time. Years, maybe. That some wounds ran too deep for quick healing. But they were trying. Showing up. Doing the work. Leonard arrived at the apartment at 5:45. Early. Military habit. Amanda opened the door wearing an apron that said world's okayest chef. Dad, she said, and the words still made his chest tight every time. Comin. Jessica's setting the table. The apartment smelled like Beth's kitchen used to smell. Garlic and tomato and basil. Amanda had found her mother's recipe cards, had taught herself to cook the meals they'd grown up with. It was her way of bringing Beth into these dinners, of making sure their mother was part of the healing too. Jessica emerged from the kitchen with wine glasses. They'd learned he didn't drink anymore, hadn't touched alcohol since getting clean at the facility. So she poured him sparkling water while she and Amanda shared a bottle of red. They sat at the small dining table. Said grace. Beth's words. The one she'd said every Sunday dinner. Bless this food and the hands that prepared it. Bless this family and the love that sustains it. Leonard's voice caught on the words, but he made it through. Over lasagna that tasted exactly like Beth's, they talked. Jessica told stories from the pediatric ward. Amanda shared updates from her research. Leonard talked about Nomad's Landing, about the veterans he was helping, about turning 6 years of failure into something that might save others from the same fate. "How's the counseling going?" Amanda asked. She was direct like that. Medical training made her comfortable with hard questions. "Good. Hard but good." Leonard had been in individual therapy twice a week since the reunion, working through PTSD, survivor's guilt, the complicated grief of losing Beth and Miguel, learning that healing wasn't linear, that some days were victories and some days were just survival. "And you're still going to the cemetery?" Jessica's question was gentle. Every Sunday, Leonard had continued his visits to Beth's grave. But now Jessica and Amanda sometimes came with him, brought flowers, talked to their mother, included Leonard in their grief instead of experiencing it separately. "I told her about you too," Leonard said, "about how successful you are, how proud she'd be." "She'd be proud of you too, Dad," Amanda said, "for doing the work, for showing up." "I don't know about that." Leonard still struggled with believing he deserved pride, deserved forgiveness, deserved any of this. "We do," Jessica said firmly. "She'd know you're trying, that you're present, that you're finally choosing us." That would matter to her. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Leonard pulled something from his jacket, an envelope, inside a check, made out to Jessica and Amanda Whitaker. "What's this?" Jessica took it, eyes widening at the amount. $12,000. Leonard's voice was quiet. "My back pay from the VA. They found my paperwork, processed my benefits. This is 6 years of disability payments I should have been getting. Dad, this is yours." Amanda looked at the check. "You need this." "No. What I need is to start making amends. You two put yourselves through medical school, took out loans, worked while studying, because I wasn't there to help. This doesn't fix that, but it's a start." The sisters looked at each other, some silent communication passing between them. Then Jessica carefully folded the check and set it on the coffee table. "Thank you," she said. "We'll use it to pay down our loans. And Dad, this means something, not because of the money, because you're thinking about us, trying to make things right." That night, driving back to the facility in the used truck Webb had helped him buy, Leonard stopped at the memorial wall where Miguel's name was inscribed. He'd started coming here too. Different cemetery, different grief, but necessary. "Still here, brother," he said to the engraved letters. "Still trying. But you'd be proud. I'm finally doing something worth the life you saved." He touched Miguel's silver star, which he'd had mounted in a shadow box that hung in his room at the facility. Beside it, a photo of Miguel in uniform, and Beth, and his daughters at 13, and now new photos, Jessica and Amanda at 30, all of them together at last week's family dinner, building new memories alongside the old. His phone rang. Webb's name on the screen. "Captain, just got word. Your nonprofit license was approved. Nomad's Landing is official." Leonard felt something unlock in his chest. "Really? Really? We can start taking referrals next week. I've already got 3 SF veterans who need help, and the VA wants to partner with us." "You did it, brother." "We did it," Leonard corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this alone. That's the point, isn't it? None of us can. We're not meant to." After the call ended, Leonard sat in the truck and let himself feel it. Pride, purpose, hope. The knowledge that Miguel's death and Beth's loss and his own 6 years of suffering might actually mean something if he could use them to help others. His final stop was the respite facility. Room 14. His room, but not forever. Emma had found him a small apartment. Movie and date in 2 weeks. Close enough to his daughters for regular dinners. Close enough to the facility to keep helping. Far enough from the streets to mark the distance he traveled. On his desk, beside Miguel's shadow box, he'd started keeping letters. From veterans he'd helped. From families who'd been reunified. From people who'd found their way off the streets because someone had looked at them and decided they were worth saving. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible, that healing can happen even after years of darkness, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment about the quiet heroes in your community who deserve recognition. And remember that every person you pass has a story. Some of them might be carrying weight they can't put down alone. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is asking for help. Sometimes the greatest act of love is offering it. Thank you for listening to Leonard's story. And if you're struggling, please know that you're worth saving too. Leonard added one more letter to the collection. This one he'd written himself. To Miguel, to Beth, to everyone he'd lost, and everyone he'd found again. Still here, still trying, and finally living a life worth the ones you gave me. He placed it in the box with the others. Tomorrow he'd help more veterans. Next week, he'd have dinner with his daughters. Next month, he'd move into his apartment. Next year, maybe he'd have built something lasting, something that turned tragedy into healing. But tonight, he just sat in his room with clean sheets and four walls and the knowledge that he wasn't alone, that he'd never been alone, that help had found him when he'd stopped believing he deserved it, and that sometimes the greatest missions weren't the ones you chose. They were the ones that chose you, the ones that turned your pain into someone else's hope, the ones that proved survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about learning to live. Leonard closed his eyes and whispered one last promise to the ghosts who'd brought him here. Still here, brothers. Still trying. And this time, finally succeeding.